There are secrets that have been buried for centuries beneath the dust of time. Nostradamus, often regarded as the greatest prophet in history, did not merely predict the Second World War with astonishing accuracy, including the rise of Hitler and the devastating use of atomic bombs. When it came to the future, he also left behind what many believe to be his final legacy, a single mysterious book said to contain the fate of humanity itself.
That we're about to go through in the world.
Everything begins with the fall of a king. Nostradamus warned of a seed of darkness, a moment when the death of a powerful leader would not mark an ending, but the beginning of something far more dangerous: the rise of a global alliance driven by corruption and chaos. Could this be a hidden description of a new age of crime and instability spreading across the world? Yet the warning does not remain on land. In the stillness of the open sea, Nostradamus spoke of a great ship consumed by red fire. Was he describing a catastrophic maritime disaster? Or was it a coded vision of a reckless military confrontation involving a red enemy powerful enough to shake the balance of global power? And the signs do not stop there. As the world descends into confusion, nature itself appears to grow restless. The earth turns to dust only to be overwhelmed by terrifying floods. Are these visions a reflection of climate change? Or could they hint at the consequences of advanced technologies capable of manipulating the weather technologies that humanity may already possess but prefers to keep hidden? Today we will not explore baseless rumors or sensational speculation. Instead, we will examine ancient texts and decode their words, connecting them with the geopolitical events unfolding across the world today. Together, we will ask a question that many are beginning to consider more seriously than ever before. Could the year 2026 truly mark the beginning of a new era for humanity? The answer may lie within the final chapter of the only book Nostradamus left behind. Do not miss this video if you want to discover what Nostradamus believed he saw about the future that may now be approaching our world. But before we open the pages of those ancient texts, we must ask an important question. Who was Michel de Nostradamus, the man the world would come to know as Nostradamus? Nostradamus, the man who saw the future. Michel de Nostradamus was born on the 14th day of December in the year 1503 in the small town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, nestled among the lavender fields and ancient stone roads of southern Provence. His family was originally Sephardic Jewish. In an era when religion and political power were closely intertwined, Jewish communities often faced severe persecution. In order to protect the family, Nostradamus' grandfather converted to Catholicism and adopted the surname Nostradam, meaning Our Lady. Yet even after converting, the family preserved a deep intellectual tradition. Nostradamus' grandfather, Jean de Saint-Rémy, was a physician and a man knowledgeable in astronomy. It was he who first taught the young Michel the foundations of mathematics, the movement of the stars, astronomical calendars, and the principles of ancient medicine. In a small candlelit room, the young Nostradamus would often sit for hours by the window, gazing into the night sky. To him, the stars were not merely points of light. They seemed like signs. Perhaps it was during nights like these that his first questions about the destiny of mankind began to take shape. The childhood of Nostradamus bore little resemblance to the image of a prophet that many people imagine. He was educated as a true scholar. Even as a teenager, he was fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, three of the most important languages of science and religion during the Middle Ages. These languages allowed him to read the ancient works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Aristotle, as well as early biblical manuscripts in their original forms. To those around him, Michel de Nostradamus appeared simply to be a brilliant young man with a promising future in medicine. But his life soon turned in a very different direction. In the year 1519, when he was only 15 years old, Nostradamus enrolled at the University of Avignon, one of the most respected academic centers in Europe at the time. Yet only a year later, tragedy struck. A devastating outbreak of plague swept across southern France. The city of Avignon was placed under quarantine, and the university was forced to close its doors. Nostradamus left the university, but instead of returning home, he began a journey that would last nearly 8 years. During that time, he traveled throughout France and also visited Italy and Spain. He studied medicinal herbs, learned traditional healing practices, and worked as a traveling apothecary. While many physicians of the era believed the plague was caused by poisoned air, Nostradamus experimented with different approaches. He encouraged cleanliness, fresh air, and the use of herbal remedies. One of his most famous treatments was known as the rose pill, a medicinal powder made from rose petals, herbs, and natural vitamins, believed to strengthen the body's resistance to disease. In cities devastated by the plague, where people often saw bodies lying in the streets each day, Nostradamus remained to treat the sick. His reputation quickly spread, but his life story was far from finished. In the year 1529, Nostradamus enrolled at the University of Montpellier, one of the oldest medical schools in Europe. There he continued pursuing the path toward becoming a formally trained physician. Yet once again his medical career was interrupted. According to university regulations, medical students were forbidden to practice as apothecaries because the profession was considered a manual trade, a status viewed as inferior to that of a physician. When the university discovered that Nostradamus had worked for many years as an apothecary, he was immediately summoned before the faculty. An expulsion document was signed by the prosecutor Guillaume Rondelet. That document still exists today in the library of the University of Montpellier. This means that officially, Nostradamus was expelled from medical school. Yet history leaves behind an intriguing mystery. Some researchers believe that he may have returned later and completed his studies. Others argue that he never received a formal medical degree. But whether he held a degree or not, Michel de Nostradamus continued practicing medicine. And it was during the years that followed among plague-stricken cities, long journeys across Europe, and countless nights spent studying ancient manuscripts, that his life began to move in a direction no one could have predicted. A path no longer concerned only with medicine, but with time, with the hidden patterns of history, and with the prophecies that would cause the name Nostradamus to be remembered across the world for more than 5 centuries. The tragedy of 1534. The moment Nostradamus began his prophetic path. As you may already know, until that time, he had been widely known as a gifted physician, a man who traveled from city to city, treating the victims of the plague. His reputation continued to spread because of his progressive medical methods and his courage to remain in cities that were slowly dying under the shadow of disease. Yet the very illness he fought so fiercely would soon take from him the people he loved most. Around the year 1534, Nostradamus' wife and his 2 young children died during an outbreak of disease. Historical sources do not agree on the exact illness, but most scholars believe it was a severe epidemic, possibly plague or another contagious disease that was sweeping across Europe at the time. For Nostradamus, this was not merely a loss, it was a collapse. A man who had devoted his life to healing others could not save his own family. The tragedy nearly shattered his faith in traditional medicine. According to many records, after the deaths of his wife and children, Nostradamus left the town where he had been living and began wandering across Europe for many years. For the next 6 years, he traveled throughout the continent. From southern France, he journeyed into Italy, then across regions that are now part of Switzerland and other ancient cities of Europe. He no longer lived as a settled physician, but more like a wandering scholar. It was during these years that Nostradamus' life slowly turned onto a different path. He devoted much of his time to studying astrology, a discipline that in the Middle Ages was often seen as a bridge between science and religion. But he did not only study the stars. He read ancient texts on mysticism, the Jewish tradition of Kabbalah, early prophetic writings, and mysterious manuscripts preserved from Greece and Rome. Many historians believe that during this period, Nostradamus also began experimenting with forms of meditation and deep contemplation, searching for patterns of destiny hidden within the movements of the universe. Some accounts describe how he would remain awake through the night, placing a bowl of water or a polished metal mirror before him, gazing into it in deep silence, while reflecting on the images that formed within his mind. Through these practices, he gradually came to believe that history does not unfold randomly. Instead, it moves in vast cycles that can be perceived by those patient enough to observe them. In the year 1547, Nostradamus' life entered another new chapter. He settled in the town of Salon-de-Provence in southern France. There he married Anne Ponsard, a wealthy widow. The marriage brought him financial stability and a new family life. Together, they eventually had 6 children. The years he spent in Salon became the period when Nostradamus began building his true reputation. Around the year 1550, he began publishing annual almanacs, yearly calendars that contained predictions about weather harvests, natural disasters, and political events for the coming year. At first, these books were considered little more than ordinary forecasts. But very quickly, people began noticing that many of Nostradamus' predictions appeared to come true. His reputation spread throughout France. Members of the nobility began paying attention to this unusual physician. What he wrote carried an atmosphere of mystery that was difficult to explain, leading many to believe he possessed a rare gift, the ability to see what others could not. People began traveling from across the country to Salon-de-Provence. They wanted to know their future. Among those who became interested in Nostradamus was Queen Catherine de' Medici, the wife of King Henry II of France. She became particularly fascinated with one of his prophetic poems, Quatrain number 35, which was believed to describe the fate of the king. Soon afterward, the queen invited Nostradamus to Paris and asked him to explain the meaning of this prophecy. The event made his name even more famous. But the true peak of his career arrived in the year 1555. That was the year he published the book titled Les Prophéties, meaning the prophecies. The book contained hundreds of 4-line poems known as quatrains. Each poem was written in a highly obscure style, mixing Old French with Latin Greek and numerous forms of wordplay. In total, Nostradamus wrote more than 1,000 prophetic verses. He deliberately composed them in vague language in order to avoid the attention of the Inquisition, the powerful authority that could punish those accused of sorcery or unlawful prophecy. Immediately after its publication, Les Prophéties created a wave of intense public reaction. Some people believed Nostradamus was a fraud or even an agent of dark forces. Yet many others were convinced he possessed a genuine prophetic ability. Among his strongest supporters were members of the European nobility who constantly searched for insight into their own destinies. According to admirers of Nostradamus, his poems predicted many of the great events of history, from the French Revolution and the World Wars to modern events, such as the moment when humanity set foot on the moon. Historians, however, often point out that Nostradamus' prophecies were written in extremely ambiguous language. Their meanings usually seemed clear only after the events had already occurred. This ambiguity has made his prophecies one of the most enduring mysteries in human history. But perhaps the strangest story connected to Nostradamus concerns his own death. He once told a friend that he would not survive beyond the first day of July in the year 1566. "I will die before dawn," he reportedly said. The next morning, his family discovered that he had passed away. Nostradamus was buried in a church in Salon-de-Provence, and his remains were later transferred to the Church of Saint-Laurent. His tomb still exists in France today. For more than 400 years, Les Prophéties has remained one of the most controversial books in human history. More than 1,000 quatrains, obscure metaphors, symbols that seem to lie beyond ordinary understanding. Together they form a labyrinth with no clear exit, a puzzle that challenges even the greatest minds. People continue to ask the same question. Was Nostradamus truly a traveler through time? A man who somehow glimpsed events that had not yet happened? Or was he simply a genius who understood a harsh truth that history often repeats itself? Centuries later, when scholars look back at the ancient pages of Nostradamus' writings, many are startled to find verses that appear to describe events that unfolded long after his lifetime. From the fall of powerful empires to the rise of dictators such as Hitler, from revolutions that reshaped nations to conflicts that transformed the balance of the world, words written in the 16th century sometimes seem to sketch a portrait of our own era. And yet the book he left behind may not merely be a record of past tragedies. It may also be a warning. When those ancient verses are placed beside today's economic uncertainties, controversial technologies, and the increasingly severe changes in the global climate, a disturbing picture of the year 2026 slowly begins to emerge. But to truly understand what he believed he saw about the future, we cannot simply look at scattered predictions. We must travel back in time, returning to the very moment when Nostradamus first placed his pen to paper and began writing the opening lines of the ancient book that would later become Les Prophéties. The opening poem in Century 1 of Nostradamus's work is often seen as the gateway into his entire prophetic world. The verses read, "Being seated at night in secret study alone, rested on the brass stool. A small flame comes out of the solitude, making that which is not believed to be uttered in vain." 4 brief lines yet, they reveal a mysterious practice that Nostradamus believed could open the mind to visions of the future. According to many researchers, this poem is not a specific prophecy. Instead, it appears to describe the method Nostradamus used when searching for insight and revelation. He often worked at night. In a quiet room, Nostradamus would sit alone at his desk, placing before him a bowl of water or a polished metal mirror. Many historical descriptions also mention a brass stool, the seat upon which he would rest in complete stillness. For Nostradamus, this was not an act of magic. He viewed it as a combination of astrology, philosophical reflection, and careful observation of the universe. In his era, many scholars believed that the planets and stars were not merely objects in the sky. They were signs reflecting the order of the universe, and from that order, one could infer the great movements of history. For this reason, Nostradamus spent countless hours studying astronomical tables, star charts, and planetary cycles. Yet in this first poem, he does not speak about calculations. Instead, he speaks of a small flame. It may simply refer to a candle burning in a dark room. But many scholars believe Nostradamus was describing a symbolic image, a moment when the human mind reaches a level of understanding beyond ordinary thought. From that stillness, he wrote that things which seem impossible to believe would be spoken, words that at first many people would dismiss as meaningless. Yet with time, those words would become questions that continue to haunt humanity. Nostradamus never openly declared himself to be a prophet in a divine sense. In the prefaces to several of his works, he referred to himself simply as an observer, a man who looked at the sky, studied history, and tried to recognize the patterns that repeat themselves across generations. In his view, the story of humanity moves like an immense circle. Empires rise and then fall. Wars appear and eventually fade. New generations rise from the ashes of those who came before them. In this opening quatrain, Nostradamus does not speak of a king or a particular battle. He speaks of signs from the heavens. For him, the movement of the stars held the key to understanding the great transformations of the world. Planets shift, astronomical cycles change, and alongside those cosmic rhythms, the ages of humanity also begin to shift. Perhaps during those long nights of the 16th century, as Nostradamus sat alone in a small room in Provence, he did not see clear visions like scenes in a dream. What he may have perceived were symbols, fragments of history scattered across time, empires collapsing, rivers of blood flowing through wars of conquest, and human beings standing within the current of time, unaware that they were part of a cycle far greater than themselves. For that reason, Nostradamus's first poem is not merely a prophecy. It is more like an introduction, a doorway leading into the labyrinth of more than 1,000 quatrains he would later write. Verses that for more than 5 centuries, historians, scholars, and seekers of hidden knowledge have continued trying to decipher. Because if Nostradamus truly saw something during those silent nights, then the greatest question still remains ahead. What did he see about the future of our world? The shocking prophecy of Paris, the event that established Nostradamus's fame. First, let us travel back in time to examine the prophecies that once fundamentally altered humanity's perception of destiny. In the year 1559, all of France was plunged into utter astonishment when the verses from Century 1, Quatrain 35 of Nostradamus became a painful reality right in the heart of Paris. He had written these lines many years prior. The young lion will overcome the older one. On the field of combat in a single battle, he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made one, then he dies a cruel death. This is how destiny was ordained, an event that completely shattered the French royalty's skepticism toward the impossible. In the summer of 1559, Paris was immersed in jubilant festivities to celebrate the peace of Château-Cambrésis. Amidst the grandeur of the celebration, King Henry II, a powerful sovereign, decided to enter a jousting tournament. His opponent was Count Gabriel de Montgomery, a young captain of immense strength. True to the prophecy Nostradamus had warned of, the young lion would overcome the older one. As the trumpet sounded, the entire arena held its breath. The 2 knights charged at each other with blistering speed. In a terrifying instant, the lance in Montgomery's hand shattered upon impact. A sharp wooden splinter flew off, piercing directly into the slit of the king's golden visor. The lance tip penetrated the eyeball and drove deep into the brain. The crowd transitioned from cheering to a stunned, chaotic silence. King Henry II collapsed onto the arena floor. The 2 wounds to his head and eye merged into one in a pool of blood. The king endured excruciating agony for 10 days and nights, while the most renowned physicians of the era remained entirely powerless. On the 10th of July, the king drew his final breath. This event dealt a fatal blow to the French monarchy. When people turned back to the collection of poems by Nostradamus, they were struck with horror to realize that every detail, from the golden cage and the young lion to the pierced eye, had been described years in advance. Nostradamus was not merely a poet or a common physician. In the moment King Henry II fell, the entire court understood Nostradamus was a man who had perceived the grim currents of the future before they had even begun. He had read the Book of Destiny, where life and death are separated only by the blink of an eye. But Nostradamus did not stop with accidents within royal courts. His next prediction stands as another example of his ability to see far beyond his own time, reaching toward events on a global scale. He seemed to perceive the threads of destiny stretching across centuries. In the pages of his ancient writings, he described a dictator bearing the name Seer, a name that centuries later would cause the entire world to tremble as people watched it take form in reality. A prophecy fulfilled the rise of Hitler. Indeed, if in Century 1, Quatrain 35, Nostradamus appeared to describe the tragic death of a French king, then in the pages that followed, he seemed to warn of something far more terrifying. No longer an accident within a royal court or the downfall of a single individual, but the rise of a force powerful enough to pull an entire continent into a storm of war, a storm that would change the course of European history. In the 1550s, when Nostradamus wrote, Les Prophéties, Europe was still living in a world shaped by monarchies and religious conflicts. The greatest wars of that era revolved around struggles for power between kingdoms or disputes between Catholics and Protestants. The very idea of a global war, one that would draw dozens of nations into a single conflict and claim the lives of tens of millions, was almost beyond human imagination at the time. No one could have pictured armored columns of tanks crossing borders, mechanized armies moving with unprecedented speed, or waves of aerial bombardment capable of leveling entire cities within hours. And yet, in one of his most mysterious verses, Nostradamus seemed to glimpse a future filled with precisely that kind of upheaval. He also appeared to sketch a remarkably vivid portrait of this future dictator in Century 3, Quatrain 35. The original Old French text reads, De plus profond de l'Occident d'Europe, de pauvres gens un jeune enfant naîtra, qui par sa langue séduira grande troupe, son renommée croîtra au règne d'Orient. A commonly accepted translation reads, From the deepest part of Western Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He who by his tongue will seduce a great army. His fame will grow toward the realm of the East. When these lines were first read in the 16th century, they may have seemed like nothing more than a vague metaphor. But when the 20th century witnessed the rise of Adolf Hitler, many people began to revisit this quatrain with a sense of unease. Why did this verse leave such a haunting impression on historians and researchers? First, there is the phrase, "from the deepest part of Western Europe," and the image of a child born of poor people. Adolf Hitler was born in 1889 in Braunau am Inn, a small town located on the border between Austria and Germany. At the time, the region belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Although geographically near the center of Europe, it was still culturally part of the Western European world. Hitler's family did not belong to the aristocracy or the ruling elite. His father, Alois Hitler, worked as a low-ranking customs official. Family life was often strict and unstable. After his father's death, the household faced financial difficulties. Hitler's early years were also marked by repeated failure. He applied twice to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, and both times he was rejected. For several years, he lived in cheap boarding houses in Vienna, trying to survive by painting small artworks and selling postcards to tourists. Seen from this perspective, the image of a child born of poor people in Nostradamus' verse creates a striking coincidence. But the detail that captures the most attention appears in the third line of the quatrain. "He who by his tongue will seduce a great army." Adolf Hitler did not begin his path to power through military command or physical force. In reality, after the end of World War I, Germany faced a deep political and economic crisis. Many Germans felt humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, while unemployment and poverty spread across the country. It was within this atmosphere of anger and frustration that Hitler emerged. In the early 1920s, he joined the German Workers' Party, a small political group in Munich. There, Hitler began to gain attention not because of military strength, but because of his extraordinary oratory ability. People who attended his speeches often described how he could control the emotional rhythm of a crowd. He would begin slowly and quietly, then gradually build intensity. With powerful gestures and carefully chosen words, he stirred feelings of anger, pride, and national identity among his listeners. His speeches in Munich beer halls began attracting hundreds of people, then thousands. From those gatherings, Hitler helped transform the small movement into the Nazi Party, which rapidly expanded during the 1930s and eventually became the dominant political force in Germany. The renowned historian Ian Kershaw, one of the world's leading experts on Hitler, once observed that Hitler's greatest strength was his ability to channel the collective emotions of a society in crisis. In other words, his most dangerous weapon was not artillery or soldiers, it was language. And this is precisely why Nostradamus' line, "by his tongue, he will seduce a great army," has drawn so much attention when people look back at the events of the 20th century. The final line of the quatrain has also sparked considerable debate. His fame will grow toward the realm of the East. Some interpreters believe this refers to the alliance between Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, two of the principal members of the Axis powers during the Second World War. Japan, located in the eastern part of the world, became one of Hitler's most significant wartime allies. Others interpret the line as a reference to Hitler's eastward ambitions, especially the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, known as Operation Barbarossa, one of the largest military campaigns in human history. The conflict on the Eastern Front would last for years and become one of the most brutal theaters of the entire war. When all of these elements are placed together, some observers believe that Nostradamus appears to have described with surprising accuracy the outline of a future dictator, a man born into modest circumstances, not raised among the powerful, not rising first through armies, but rising through the extraordinary power of words. But his rise to power was only one part of a much darker picture. In the following pages of the ancient text, Nostradamus appeared to reveal a haunting ending. It was no longer a story about power, but about a terrifying reckoning for what he had unleashed upon the world, a warning from the past for anyone who would dare challenge humanity itself. In Century 2, Quatrain 24, a verse that many interpreters associate with Hitler. Nostradamus wrote, "Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. Most of the battlefield will be against Hister. The Great One will be dragged into an iron cage, when the child of Germany understands nothing." When these lines were first read within the context of the 16th century, they carried almost no clear meaning. But when the 20th century witnessed the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of the Second World War, many people began to look back at them with a sense of unease. Why did this prophecy shock so many readers? First, there is the name Hister. In ancient Latin, Hister was actually an old name for the Danube River, one of the great rivers flowing through Central Europe. The Danube runs through many regions that played crucial roles in European history, including Austria, where Adolf Hitler was born in the year 1889, in the small town of Braunau am Inn, near the German border. This detail led many interpreters to believe that Nostradamus might have used a form of linguistic code transforming the name of a river into a symbolic reference to a future historical figure. Of course, many modern scholars argue that Nostradamus may simply have been referring to the geographic region surrounding the Danube. Nevertheless, the striking similarity between the word Hister and the name Hitler continues to send a chill down the spine of those who reflect on history. The next line of the quatrain, "Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers," has also been interpreted in several ways. Some believe these beasts symbolize the invading armies of the Second World War. When the war erupted in the year 1939, the mechanized forces of Nazi Germany rapidly crossed many of Europe's major rivers, sweeping into Poland, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and numerous other territories. The strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, caused entire nations to collapse within only a few weeks. Columns of tanks and mechanized divisions surged forward like a pack of predators rushing across the border. During the early years of the conflict, more than 20 nations were directly or indirectly occupied or crushed beneath the march of Nazi military power. From the quiet plains of Poland to the elegant boulevards of Paris, entire societies collapsed in a matter of weeks. The movement of thousands of tanks, bomber aircraft, and heavy artillery created a wave of destruction unlike anything humanity had witnessed before. And the cost of that destruction can be measured in staggering numbers. Historians estimate that between 70 million and 85 million people lost their lives during the Second World War, roughly 3% of the world's population at that time. Among them were tens of millions of innocent civilians who perished through bombardments, starvation, and brutal policies of genocide. The devastation of property was equally catastrophic. Thousands of cities across Europe and Asia were reduced to rubble. From Warsaw to Rotterdam, from London to Stalingrad, some of the world's oldest cultural and industrial centers were transformed into mountains of broken stone. The economic cost of rebuilding the world after the war eventually reached trillions of dollars in modern value, a burden so immense that many nations required decades to recover. What followed after the Nazi armies crossed the rivers was not merely territorial occupation. It was the systematic stripping away of the most basic human rights of millions of people. The destruction was so immense that when Nostradamus wrote about hungry beasts, some interpreters believe he was describing the terrifying indifference of a war machine that reduces everything in its path to ashes. If Blitzkrieg was the method through which Hitler tore through Europe, it was his insatiable hunger for power that turned the entire continent into a furnace of war, one in which no living being could truly feel safe. Nostradamus seemed to foresee such devastation, a vision of total destruction, where human beings treated one another with a cruelty even more savage than wild animals. The third line, "The Great One will be dragged into an iron cage," has also been widely connected with the final fate of Hitler. In April of 1945, as the Soviet Red Army unleashed a storm of fire upon Berlin and the Allied forces tightened their encirclement, the world order that Hitler once commanded collapsed completely. The man who had once stood at the height of power, the man who had made much of Europe tremble beneath the boots of his armies, was forced to retreat into the Führerbunker, a heavily reinforced concrete bunker buried deep beneath the ground. The image of the iron cage, described by Nostradamus when seen through the eyes of later generations, appears not only as a metaphor for military encirclement, it also resembles a prison of his own making. Consider the cruel contrast. Above ground, the 1,000-year Reich that Hitler once promised had already crumbled into dust. Great cities had become landscapes of shattered ruins. Below ground, the dictator was trapped within narrow, damp concrete walls. His vision was no longer focused on maps of global conquest, but on the cold barriers separating him from the reality of defeat. On April 30th, 1945, when the end had become inevitable, Hitler chose to end his own life inside that underground chamber. It was the moment when the absolute power he once possessed vanished completely, revealing the final image of a defeated man, surrounded by the consequences of his own fanaticism. Many interpreters believe that Nostradamus' choice of words, saying the dictator would be dragged into the cage, suggests that this was not a voluntary departure wrapped in glory, but an unavoidable outcome imposed by history itself. Even today, when historians study the layout of the bunker where Hitler spent his final days, many feel a shiver when recalling a prophecy written more than 4 centuries earlier. Nostradamus never called him the king or the victor. Instead, he referred to him simply as the Great One, a title that now sounds almost painfully ironic before sealing his fate inside the iron cage of destiny. The final line, "When the child of Germany understands nothing," is often interpreted symbolically. After the storm of steel passed, what remained was not only twisted metal and broken stone. The world that German children saw after the year 1945 resembled a wasteland. They grew up surrounded by the permanent absence of loved ones inside cities so heavily bombed that they could hardly recognize the streets where their parents once lived. Yet the physical destruction, tragic as it was not the deepest wound. The true collapse lay within the spirit of a nation that had been betrayed by its own ideology. Those children grew up in the uneasy silence of a society emerging from the shadow of Nazism. They were forced to confront a harsh truth. The fathers and grandfathers they had once believed to be heroes were in many cases participants in crimes that shocked the conscience of humanity. The phrase "understands nothing" carries a profound sadness. It reflects the disorientation of a generation stripped of the right to dream, stripped of pride, and stripped of a clear understanding of its own past. They became victims caught between the ashes of crimes they never committed, struggling to build a life in a national identity deeply scarred by bloodshed and madness. Nostradamus did not merely foresee a military defeat. He foresaw the collapse of a generation. He seemed to glimpse the confusion in the eyes of children standing among the ruins of Berlin, carrying the unbearable weight of the past while facing an uncertain future. It stands as one of the most painful reminders that war never truly ends for those who remain behind. And when we read those lines today, we realize that the price of fanaticism is not paid only in the blood of soldiers. It is also paid in the souls of future generations, those who must grow up knowing that the place they once called home has been reduced to the ruins of broken promises and devastating lies. It is precisely this brutality that transformed the verses of Nostradamus from mere literature into a harsh measure of time itself. We are left wondering how a man who lived more than 400 years ago could appear to glimpse the suffering of the children of 1945. What makes this story so haunting is not only the apparent coincidence between the verses and historical events. It is also the vast distance in time. More than 380 years passed between the moment Nostradamus wrote these lines in the 16th century and the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. A span of time long enough for ancient words to become a whisper echoing across generations. For those who believe in Nostradamus's prophetic abilities, it feels like a warning sent from a distant past. He did not simply see war. He seemed to glimpse the rise of an extreme ideology capable of pulling the entire world into a spiral of destruction. At the same time, many modern historians remind us that Nostradamus' verses are often ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations, written in a mixture of Old French, Latin, and symbolic language. Because of this, interpreting them after historical events have already occurred can sometimes lead people to see connections that were not obvious before. Whether one believes in Nostradamus' prophetic vision or not, one fact remains undeniable. The history of the 20th century has shown that the rise of a dictator driven by limitless ambition can alter the fate of the entire world. And when we look back at those ancient verses today, we cannot help but ask a deeply unsettling question. if the great storms of history return in cycles? Will humanity in the 21st century possess the wisdom to recognize the warning signs from the past? Or will the world once again witness the emergence of new history's forces ready to pull humanity into another spiral of chaos? Even more unsettling, the influence of these prophecies did not stop at mere curiosity. Because Nostradamus had become so famous, some of the most brutal forces in history did not hesitate to turn his writings into a tool within their struggle for power. They understood a simple truth. When people's faith begins to waver, they can easily be guided by ancient words interpreted according to the intentions of those in authority. Shortly after Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, Magda Goebbels, the wife of the notorious Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, reportedly came across a passage in the book Mysterien von Sonne und Seele, meaning Mysteries of the Sun and the Soul. In that work, one of Nostradamus's quatrains was interpreted as predicting that major crises would erupt in Britain and Poland in the very same year, 1939. Recognizing what appeared to be a perfect opportunity to weaken the morale of their enemies, Goebbels quickly ordered the mass printing and distribution of propaganda leaflets. The target audience was not only the German population, but more importantly, the people living in neutral countries. By spreading the idea that the victory of Nazi Germany had already been destined 4 centuries earlier, the Nazi regime hoped to convince their opponents that resistance was futile and that opposing fate itself would be an act of self-destruction. But the struggle over Nostradamus's words did not move in only one direction. The Allied powers, guided by specialists in psychological warfare, soon realized the potential influence of this ancient weapon. They responded with large-scale counter-propaganda campaigns, dropping millions of leaflets over territories occupied by Germany. The message in these leaflets was the exact opposite. According to Allied interpretations, Nostradamus had actually foreseen the catastrophic downfall of Hitler's regime. The fascination with Nostradamus even spread into Hollywood. The film studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, one of the largest entertainment empires of the era, produced a series of short films about the famous prophet. These productions were not created merely for entertainment. They were part of a broader effort to strengthen American morale and reinforce public confidence in the Allied cause, suggesting that evil would inevitably be defeated according to the moral order of the universe, an order that Nostradamus himself was believed to have glimpsed centuries earlier. In many ways, during the darkest years of the Second World War, Nostradamus became what some historians have called an invisible warrior. He did not belong to either side. Yet his verses became one of the most powerful psychological weapons of the war, fiercely contested by both sides as they sought to influence the beliefs and emotions of millions of people. The Great Fire of London in 1666, when disaster was foretold. Indeed, the true power of Nostradamus did not end with his apparent ability to identify dictators or foresee psychological warfare. There are events for which he seemed to call out the moment itself with numerical detail so striking that even the most skeptical historians pause in silence. If one seeks a powerful piece of evidence for the idea that Nostradamus could see across time, the Great Fire of London often stands at the center of that discussion. This catastrophe was not simply a major urban disaster of early modern Europe. It also became a fascinating intersection between history and prophecy, where the ancient verses of Nostradamus appear to reflect a real event that would unfold in the future. In Century 2, Quatrain 51, Nostradamus wrote, "The blood of the just will be lacking in London, burned through the fire of 66. The ancient lady will fall from her high place. Many of the same sect will be killed." This verse draws attention because of one remarkable detail. Nostradamus directly used the number 66. Within the context of the 16th century, writing in such a way gives the impression of a clearly marked moment in time. More than a century after the verse was published in September of 1666, the city of London experienced one of the most devastating disasters in its history. London awoke in chaos. The fire began in a small bakery on Pudding Lane, and yet no one imagined that the flames would soon consume an entire city. The wind howled through the narrow streets, and the dry wooden houses stood like stacks of kindling waiting for a spark. Residents fled desperately toward the banks of the River Thames, leaving behind their homes, their livelihoods, and the memories of a lifetime as everything around them turned to ash. Rows of wooden houses, warehouses, taverns, and churches caught fire one after another, forming an enormous sea of flames that spread across the city for days. The fire burned continuously for 4 days, from the 2nd day of September to the 6th day of September in the year 1666. When the disaster finally ended, more than 13,000 houses and 87 parish churches had been destroyed. Nearly 80% of the old city of London, within its medieval walls, had been reduced to ashes. Among the many buildings lost, the most symbolic was Old St. Paul's Cathedral. This immense cathedral had stood for centuries and had long been considered the spiritual heart of London. When the flames reached the church, the intense heat melted the lead covering its roof, causing the structure to collapse under the overwhelming force of the fire. Witnesses later described the moment when the massive roof and structure fell into the burning streets as a scene of terrifying grandeur. It was precisely this image that many people later connected to Nostradamus's line, "The ancient lady will fall from her high place." In medieval European literature, cities and monumental structures were often personified as an ancient lady. For this reason, many researchers believe Nostradamus may have used this symbolic image to represent one of London's most ancient and revered landmarks. Another element that draws attention to this prophecy is the striking combination of place number and architectural symbol. In the world of prophecy, a verse that simultaneously refers to London, a number associated with the year 1666, and the destruction of a major religious symbol such as St. Paul's Cathedral, creates a convergence that many observers consider extraordinarily rare. For those who believe in Nostradamus's prophetic ability, the Great Fire of London becomes a powerful example of the idea that the French seer possessed an unusual sensitivity to the movements of time itself. They believe Nostradamus did more than observe the world around him. They believe he sensed deeper historical cycles, moments when the great events of human civilization appear to unfold according to an invisible order. When London burned in the year 1666, many people in later centuries looked back at his ancient verses and felt as though history itself had been quietly announced long before it occurred. At the same time, modern historians approach the story with careful caution. They emphasize that Nostradamus's verses were written in a highly symbolic language, blending Old French Latin and layers of metaphor. Such a style naturally allows for wide interpretation once historical events have already taken place. Yet regardless of how one chooses to interpret the prophecy, the Great Fire of London holds a unique place in the history of les prophéties. For many readers, it represents a moment when a 4-line verse seemed to step beyond the boundary of literature and touch the living current of history itself. Nostradamus' most shocking prophecy linked to Japan. If the fire in London represented a tragedy of wood and flame, then what unfolded in Japan in the year 1945 revealed the destruction of a kind of fire that had never existed before. In his dark and somber verses, Nostradamus seemed to glimpse the appearance of artificial suns capable of erasing life itself. Specifically, in several quatrains of Les Prophéties, Nostradamus used imagery of blinding light fire falling from the sky and devastation far beyond the scale of the wars known in his time. When readers returned to these verses after the 20th century, many felt that the lines resembled a hazy portrait of the nuclear age. In the 16th century, warfare revolved mainly around swords, cannons, and early artillery. The idea of a weapon capable of burning an entire city within seconds lay far beyond anything people of that era could imagine. Yet Nostradamus repeatedly described fire from the sky and terrifying light spreading across cities. Some interpreters have connected those images with the events that took place in Japan in the year 1945. Researchers also believe that one such verse appears to warn about that fateful moment. Within 2 cities, there will be hunts never seen before. Death will fall from the sky, hotter than many suns together. Disease and hunger will spread everywhere. a tragedy that humanity will remember for a very long time. These images lead many people to think of two events that permanently changed the history of modern warfare. In August of 1945, during the final stage of the Second World War, the United States deployed the first atomic bombs ever used in human history. The first bomb, named Little Boy, was dropped over the city of Hiroshima on the morning of August 6, 1945. The second bomb, called Fat Man, was dropped over Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. The moment the explosion occurred over Hiroshima produced a blinding flash of light and a massive fireball. Temperatures at the center of the blast reached millions of degrees, releasing energy equivalent to tens of thousands of tons of TNT. Survivors later recalled how the sky suddenly turned white, as if a new sun had appeared above the city. Within seconds, the shockwave and overwhelming heat spread across the entire urban area. Buildings collapsed. Wood and paper ignited instantly. Vast firestorms formed throughout the city. Much of Hiroshima became a sea of flames within minutes. 3 days later, Nagasaki experienced a similar catastrophe. The Fat Man bomb exploded above the city, creating an enormous mushroom cloud rising tens of thousands of feet into the sky. The blinding flash and the force of the explosion destroyed a large portion of the urban landscape. The numbers associated with the devastation shocked the world. In Hiroshima, historical studies estimate that approximately 70,000 to 80,000 people died on the first day alone. In the months that followed, the death toll increased as victims suffered from severe burns, radiation exposure, and illness. By the end of the year, 1945, the total number of deaths connected to the Hiroshima bombing was often estimated at around 140,000 people. In Nagasaki, between 40,000 and 70,000 people died within a short time after the explosion, and the number continued to rise in the following years. Beyond the human toll, the physical destruction reached an unprecedented scale. Most of central Hiroshima turned into a charred landscape. More than 60% of the city's buildings were completely destroyed. In Nagasaki industrial districts, factories, schools, and entire residential neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. The survivors of the bombings received a special name in Japanese, hibakusha, meaning people affected by the explosion. For many years after the war, they lived with the long-term effects of radiation exposure. Illnesses such as leukemia, cancer, and other serious health conditions appeared at higher rates than among the general population. These consequences transformed the two cities into the most powerful symbols of the destructive force of nuclear weapons. When people look back on these events, some believe that the imagery of death falling from the sky and heat, like many suns in interpretations of Nostradamus, bears a striking resemblance to the descriptions given by witnesses in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the 16th century, science held no concept of nuclear fission or atomic energy. For that reason, the images in Nostradamus's poetry often appear through sensation and symbolism. Light brighter than the sun, fire spreading across cities, and the sky erupting in flame became images that many readers associate with nuclear explosions. After the Second World War, Hiroshima and Nagasaki took on a profound meaning in the memory of humanity. The numbers of casualties, no matter how horrifying, can never fully capture the pain of those who were lost beneath the shadow of the mushroom clouds that year. Today in Hiroshima, the Peace Memorial still stands as a silent witness. It exists not only to honor those who perished, but also to remind the world that the scars of war do not live only in collapsed buildings, but in the hearts of those who remain. That loss does not belong to a single nation. It reflects the shared grief of all humanity in the face of how fragile peace can be. When we look back at this tragedy, the purpose lies in learning from a harsh lesson rather than awakening hatred. Human intelligence moves forward with tremendous speed. Compassion grows alongside it to guide that power toward wisdom. Nostradamus once described the haunting shadows left upon the ground. Today, as humanity stands at the threshold of new technological revolutions, artificial intelligence, and increasingly powerful weapons, the warning contained in those images carries a deeper meaning than ever before. Peace does not arise by accident. Peace grows from a conscious choice that must be protected every day, so that the world never again witnesses the fall of another artificial sun upon the earth. Meanwhile, From the perspective of Nostradamus researchers, these events opened a debate that continues to this day, whether his quatrains reflected genuine prophetic insight, or whether they represent symbolic imagery interpreted after history had already unfolded. Despite differing interpretations, Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain major turning points in human history. The two cities stand as powerful reminders of the force humanity can unleash when science and warfare intersect. Placed beside the events of the 20th century, the ancient verses of Nostradamus encourage many people to reflect on the relationship between knowledge, power, and humanity's responsibility toward its own future. After the great catastrophes of the 20th century, such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many people believed that humanity had entered a new era, an age in which technology and globalization would open unprecedented opportunities for progress. History, however, often unfolds through unexpected turning points. As the world stepped into the early years of the new millennium, another shocking event occurred and that shook the entire planet and transformed the way humanity thinks about security warfare and the future itself. The September 11th attacks, the most controversial modern event. That day began like an ordinary morning in New York City. Thousands of office workers were carrying out their routines inside the World Trade Center, a complex of several buildings, whose most recognizable structures were the Twin Towers, each rising more than 400 meters above the skyline and long regarded as symbols of global economic power. At 8:46 in the morning, local time, a passenger plane known as American Airlines Flight 11 was hijacked by terrorists and deliberately flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Only 17 minutes later, at 9:03 in the morning, a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, struck the South Tower. Images of the two towering skyscrapers burning against the sky of Manhattan spread across the world within minutes. Millions of people watched the tragedy unfold live on television in stunned disbelief. In less than 2 hours, both towers collapsed, one after the other. Massive structures of steel and concrete crashed to the ground, sending enormous clouds of dust across the entire financial district of New York. At the same time, 2 other airplanes were also hijacked. One crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense. The other fell into a field in the state of Pennsylvania, after passengers on board attempted to regain control of the aircraft from the attackers. By the end of that day, nearly 3,000 people from more than 90 countries had lost their lives. Thousands more were injured, and the world entered a completely new era defined by global conflict and counterterrorism efforts. Immediately after the tragedy, an unusual phenomenon appeared across online forums and media outlets. Many people began searching through the ancient prophecies of Nostradamus, wondering whether the 16th century Seer had ever hinted at such a disaster. One of the quatrains most frequently mentioned was Century 6. Quatrain 97, often translated as follows: "The sky will burn at 45 degrees. Fire will approach the great new city. Immediately a great scattered flame will leap up when they wish to have proof from the Normans." After the events of September 11th, many readers revisited this verse and felt that it evoked frightening imagery. The phrase, "the great new city," is often associated with New York. In European historical perspective, the city was frequently viewed as a new city of the world, a financial and economic center, symbolizing the modern age. The description of the sky burning reminded many observers of the moment when the airplane struck the towers and flames erupted high above Manhattan. Meanwhile, the image of a great scattered flame brought to mind the explosions and blazing fires that spread throughout the upper floors of the Twin Towers. Another detail that sparked debate was the reference to 45 degrees. New York City lies at approximately 40 degrees and 42 minutes north latitude, which places it close to the 41st parallel. Some interpreters believe Nostradamus may have used older geographic measurements or symbolic numbers common in medieval writings. Historians and scholars who study Nostradamus, however, often approach these interpretations with caution. They point out that no historical evidence indicates Nostradamus ever referred directly to New York or to the September 11th attacks. His verses typically rely on broad imagery, such as fire sky cities and war. This ambiguity allows later generations to interpret the poems according to the major events of their own time. Another factor that complicated the discussion was the appearance of numerous fake Nostradamus quotations on the internet immediately after the attacks. Several widely circulated prophecies were actually written in the 20th century and later attributed to Nostradamus to create an atmosphere of mystery. Even so, the events of September 11th became a powerful example of how humanity often searches ancient texts for meaning whenever history experiences a profound shock. The tragedy reshaped the global political landscape. It led to the beginning of the global war on terror military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, and major transformations in security systems and surveillance practices around the world. For many people, September 11, 2001 marked the moment when the world realized that the dangers of the modern era could appear in completely unexpected ways. For that reason, when people return to the ancient verses of Nostradamus, many feel as though history always contains warning signs, signals that humanity often recognizes only after the event has already unfolded. Whether those verses represent genuine prophecy or simply coincidences shaped by human interpretation, the events of September 11th leave behind a profound lesson. In an increasingly interconnected world, a single event in one city can send shockwaves across the entire planet. And so the question that many people continue to ask when reading Nostradamus remains both simple and deeply thought-provoking. If the great events of the past appear to cast shadows within ancient verses, could the events of the future already exist somewhere within those pages, waiting for humanity to finally understand them? And if great disasters like September 11th reveal the fragility of an entire civilization, history has also witnessed moments when the fate of a nation was decided by the sound of a single gunshot. Nostradamus did not overlook such turning points. In his verses, he seemed to glimpse the shadows lurking behind some of the most powerful figures of their time moments. When violence struck without warning, transforming a leader of global influence into the center of a destiny, marked by bloodshed and mysteries that remain unresolved to this day. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a turning point in modern history. After the major upheavals of the 20th century and the early 21st century, another event in modern history has continually drawn the attention of researchers studying Nostradamus. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. This remains one of the most shocking political assassinations of the 20th century, and is also among the historical events that many people have linked to the mysterious Quatrains found in Les Prophéties. The story begins on November 22, 1963, when President John Fitzgerald Kennedy traveled to Dallas, Texas during a political tour intended to prepare for his 1964 re-election campaign. At approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, the presidential motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza, greeted by thousands of citizens. Kennedy was riding in an open-top limousine alongside his wife Jacqueline Kennedy, Texas Governor John Connally, and Connally's wife. As the motorcade turned through the plaza, gunshots suddenly rang out. 2 bullets struck President Kennedy. One passed through his throat, while the second hit the back of his head and caused a fatal wound. The limousine rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where doctors attempted desperately to save his life. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, President Kennedy was officially pronounced dead. The news spread with incredible speed. The entire United States fell into shock. Millions of people watched the unfolding tragedy live on television in grief and disbelief. Only a few hours after the shooting, Dallas police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, who was identified as the primary suspect in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Oswald was accused of firing the shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, a warehouse building located near the plaza. However, Oswald repeatedly insisted that he was merely a patsy, someone blamed for a crime committed by others. In fact, declassified records later revealed that the life of this man contained many complex and puzzling details. Oswald had previously served as a United States Marine. In 1959, he left the United States and traveled to the Soviet Union, where he announced his intention to live permanently, While in the Soviet Union, Oswald lived in the city of Minsk and remained under close surveillance by the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency. According to documents released later, Soviet authorities compiled numerous files on him. A former high-ranking official connected to the KGB, named Nikonov, reportedly reviewed 5 thick dossiers concerning Oswald. His conclusion was clear: Oswald was not an agent controlled by the KGB. The documents also indicate that Oswald participated in firearms training while in the Soviet Union. However, Soviet assessments suggested that his shooting ability was not exceptional. One note in the files stated, "After examining the records, Nikonov doubted that any organization could effectively control Oswald. During his entire stay in the Soviet Union, the KGB monitored him closely and continuously." If these details are accurate, the idea that this gunman could successfully assassinate a president from a long distance raises serious questions. The situation became even more complicated 2 days later. While Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas Police Department, another shocking event occurred. In front of reporters and millions of television viewers, Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner, stepped forward and shot Oswald in the basement of the police station. Oswald's death deepened the mystery surrounding the case. The man accused of being the lone assassin never appeared in a formal trial. As a result, the full truth behind the assassination became one of the great unanswered questions in American history. In the decades that followed, hundreds of books, documentaries, and investigations attempted to explain the assassination. Various theories emerged, including the possibility of multiple gunmen, the involvement of intelligence agencies, or the presence of complex political conspiracies. The tense relationship between President Kennedy and the CIA. Declassified documents have also revealed another important aspect of the political climate of the time: the complicated relationship between President Kennedy and the Central Intelligence Agency. In many situations, the CIA conducted covert operations with the approval of the White House. However, some operations unfolded in ways that left the Kennedy administration feeling that it did not have full control. One particularly important event was the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. This operation, organized by the CIA, aimed to support Cuban exiles in overthrowing the government of Fidel Castro. President Kennedy approved the plan, but declined to provide large-scale direct military support. The operation ended in failure, creating significant tension between the White House and the CIA. Following the incident, Kennedy dismissed CIA Director Allen Dulles. One document recorded Kennedy's famous remark after the Bay of Pigs disaster: "I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." These declassified records reveal the extremely complex political and intelligence environment of the Cold War era. That atmosphere of tension helped generate numerous theories, debates, and enduring mysteries surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy. An event that even today continues to leave many questions without a definitive answer. The Quatrains of Nostradamus and a controversial connection. Within this context, some researchers of Nostradamus have linked the assassination of Kennedy to Century 1, Quatrain 26. The verse is commonly interpreted in meaning as follows: "The great man will fall in the middle of the day by a fatal blow, an evil act foretold by the bearer of news." According to the prediction, an innocent man accused will die. The one responsible for the crime will hide in the shadow of the pillars. When placed alongside historical events, several details give many readers a chilling feeling. The image of the great man falling in the middle of the day reminds many people of the moment when Kennedy was shot at midday in Dallas while his motorcade moved through the crowd. The phrase, "a fatal blow," is often connected to the bullet that struck the president's head, the wound that led to his death almost immediately. The line describing an innocent man accused also raises questions. Lee Harvey Oswald consistently insisted that he was not the true assassin. The fact that he was killed by Jack Ruby before appearing in court added an even deeper sense of mystery to the story. The image of the shadow of the pillars is often associated with the shooting position inside the book depository building, where Oswald was believed to have concealed himself behind windows and architectural structures while aiming at the presidential motorcade. Although these parallels capture public attention, many historians emphasize that the language used by Nostradamus is highly symbolic and open to multiple interpretations. His quatrains often include imagery, such as the great man Fireblood or death in the daytime descriptions that could correspond to many different events throughout history. Even so, the Kennedy assassination carries a distinctive element. The main suspect was killed shortly after his arrest, creating a dramatic sequence of events rarely seen in political assassinations. This unusual chain of events leads many observers to feel as though the story resembles a script that had already been written. But beyond the debates over ancient verses, that assassination permanently divided American history into two halves before and after November 22, 1963. It was more than a death. It was the collapse of a powerful belief. Before that moment, many Americans looked toward the future with a sense of optimism. The young president represented a new spirit, a vision of reaching the stars and healing divisions within society. But when the fatal bullet tore through the air in Dallas, it also shattered the illusion of security and transparency surrounding power. On that day, the United States lost more than a leader. It lost the innocence of a nation still shaping its place in the world. From that moment forward, American society entered a long era of doubt. Distrust toward government conspiracy theories that never received definitive answers and deep fractures within society gradually expanded like a wound that refused to heal. Those who lived through that moment often recall the feeling as if a part of the nation's soul died with him. It was the day when America faced a harsh reality. Even the most powerful figures can lose their lives in broad daylight. The death of Kennedy remains more than an event recorded in history books. It stands as a profound psychological scar carried by an entire generation. It marked the end of an era of optimism in American history during the early 1960s. President Kennedy inspired an entire generation with his messages about the future, science, and peace. His famous speech about sending humans to the moon remains one of the most iconic moments of the 20th century. For that reason, the assassination in Dallas became a profound psychological shock for the entire nation. Perhaps many of us today did not witness that moment. But have you ever wondered? If that young president had not fallen, how different might our world look in the year 2026? History, however, does not allow us to start over. Nostradamus did not write only about the scars of the past. He also left behind chilling hints about the very era in which we now live. As we move deeper into the year 2026, those ancient verses seem to speak again, warning of a new chapter of upheaval that humanity may soon face. Decoding the future warnings for the year 2026. Now, as we stand in the midst of the year 2026, the quatrains of Nostradamus no longer feel like distant stories about ghosts of the past. Instead, they begin to appear as markers pointing toward the dramatic transformations that he seemed to glimpse as far back as the 16th century. The year 2026. A chilling prophecy about the fall of the supreme leader of the East. On February 28, 2026, the entire world held its breath as a dramatic event shook the Middle East. The sudden death of Iran's supreme leader was more than a political loss for a single nation. It felt like a geopolitical earthquake, sending shockwaves through the entire global balance of power. Everything happened in just 60 seconds. On February 28th, Tehran was engulfed in fire and smoke. The building of the Supreme National Security Council, long considered an impenetrable fortress, was flattened in a lightning strike operation. This was not a coincidence. It was the climax of Operation the Lion's Roar, a coordinated effort between the Central Intelligence Agency CIA and Israel's Mossad. For months, intelligence networks had tracked nearly every movement of Ali Khamenei. Tehran's fatal mistake was believing that the diplomatic negotiations taking place in Geneva would protect them. Confidence replaced caution. Officials left their underground bunkers and gathered in their offices. Even Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei emerged from his high-security shelter to attend the meeting. That moment became destiny. Just 60 seconds. That was all it took for precision missiles launched from Israeli fighter jets to bring an era to an end. At exactly 9:40 in the morning, Tehran local time missiles struck the high-security complex that housed both the office of the Supreme Leader and the Supreme National Security Council headquarters. Explosions erupted almost simultaneously across the compound, shaking the Iranian capital and leaving no time for any response. Ali Khamenei was killed at the scene, along with several powerful figures within Iran's security establishment, including Ali Shamkhani, the former secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and Mohammad Pakpour, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later stated that strong evidence indicated the Iranian leader had died. According to Israeli media, images of the body were reportedly shown to President Donald Trump as confirmation of the operation. And as you can see, when a pillar of power in the Middle East collapses, the consequences spread instantly across the world. Global financial markets trembled. Gold prices fluctuated sharply. Oil and fuel prices surged. Old alliances began to fracture. The world held its breath because the fall of a major power in the Middle East has never marked the end of history. Yet what truly sent chills across the globe was not only what appeared on modern military maps. It was something written 4 centuries earlier, Nostradamus. The prophet who many believe foresaw the collapse of empires seemed to sketch this scenario centuries ago. Within the pages of Les Prophéties, he spoke of a great pontiff who would fall, triggering the collapse of an old order. Specifically, Nostradamus once left behind a prediction, a verse that many scholars describe as a sentence of fate for any leader standing at the peak of power. He did not merely foresee death. He appeared to foresee the exact manner in which a great man would be pulled down from glory through a terrifying event descending from the sky. One of the most debated verses is Century 2, Quatrain 92. Modern translations often interpret this quatrain as follows: "Golden fire will fall from the sky to the earth, striking the one born in high rank, a new event creating wonder. The death of a great man passes through the gate of sight, a great death from the hand of the executioner." These lines carry powerful symbolic imagery, and for decades, researchers of Nostradamus have returned to this quatrain whenever the world witnesses assassinations or sudden deaths of high-ranking leaders. What makes the verse particularly striking lies in 3 central images: fire from the sky, a great man, and an executioner. The first image is golden fire falling from the sky. In the 16th century, when Nostradamus lived, warfare was fought mainly with swords, spears, and primitive artillery. Concepts such as precision missiles, guided bombs, or aerial strike weapons were completely beyond the imagination of that era. For this reason, many modern interpreters believe the image of fire from the sky may symbolize modern weapons such as long-range missiles, smart bombs, or fighter aircraft launching strikes from the air. These weapons share one common characteristic: they descend from the sky with overwhelming heat and extreme precision. The second image in the verse is the one born in high rank. In Nostradamus's writing, this phrase often refers to individuals who stand at the highest level of power, leaders born into or placed at the head of a nation or political system. Such figures usually live under the most intense security protection imaginable. Yet history repeatedly shows that those who stand at the summit of power often become the primary targets of assassination plots or political attacks. The final image, and perhaps the most unsettling, is the phrase, the executioner. Nostradamus does not describe a natural death or an accident. Instead, he invokes the figure of an executioner, suggesting a deliberate act, something planned, calculated, and carried out intentionally. In the modern world, many analysts interpret this executioner as a symbol for covert military operations, special forces missions, or carefully planned intelligence operations. When these ancient lines are placed beside the events that recently unfolded in Tehran, many people experience a chilling sense of coincidence. An attack launched from the sky, a target who stood at the highest level of power, and a death that occurred in a single moment, as if prepared long in advance. For those who believe in the idea of destiny, Nostradamus seemed to glimpse a harsh law of history. When a leader rises to the very summit of power, that leader simultaneously becomes the clearest target on the geopolitical chessboard. He never mentioned the name of a nation. He never identified a specific individual, yet he seemed to see a repeating pattern within human history. Empires rise, leaders ascend to the peak of authority, and then, in a single instant, everything can collapse beneath a fire falling from the sky. Of course, historians and scholars emphasize that the Quatrains of Nostradamus are highly symbolic and open to many different interpretations. Yet whenever great upheavals occur in the world, people often return to those ancient pages as a way of searching for meaning in the events unfolding around them. And that is precisely why, after the recent events in Iran, Century 2 Quatrain 92 has once again entered the global conversation. And the most unsettling part is this: the death of the Iranian leader may not be the only one. According to some interpretations, the fall of a second figure still lies ahead, a leader of even greater influence. And when that leader leaves this world, it may mark the moment when humanity officially enters the spiral of a conflict that no one can stop. First, let us look at the prophecies found in the famous prophetic book, The Centuries, written by the Western seer Nostradamus. The status of the centuries in Western prophecy is often considered comparable to the Chinese prophetic work Tui Bei Tu. The book contains a total of 941 prophetic verses. Among the prophecies that interpreters believe have already been fulfilled, many claim the accuracy rate appears remarkably high. However, the Centuries has a unique characteristic. In most of the prophetic poems, the time references are extremely vague, and the chronological order of events between the verses is often mixed and unclear. As a result, people usually look back after events have already occurred and only then realize that Nostradamus may have described them centuries earlier. Yet among these verses, there is one particular prophecy that appears to mention a specific moment in time with unusual precision. This is the famous prophecy about the King of Terror. The verse reads, "In the month of July, 1999, from the sky shall come the great King of Terror, to revive the great King of Angoumois. Before and after Mars shall reign over the world. Saying it will bring people a life of happiness." Before the year 1999, many interpreters believed that this verse predicted the end of the world in that very year. However, others pointed out an important detail in the line, "Before and after Mars shall reign over the world." The phrase "before and after" suggests that history would not end in July of 1999, and that the events described might represent a longer historical process. So how did Nostradamus himself explain this prophecy? According to historical accounts, in the spring of 1556, during a conversation with a French princess, Nostradamus reportedly stated that in July of 1999, a king of terror would descend from the sky and the world would face a great destruction. At the same time, he said the world would suffer damage from a powerful force associated with Mars, bringing about an unprecedented era of war and chaos. However, he also mentioned something intriguing. Nostradamus suggested that if another type of object were to appear at that time, it could prevent the destruction. Even the power of Mars would lose its influence, and the Great War might never occur. Yet he never clearly explained what this mysterious other object might be. 400 years passed quickly, and July of 1999 quietly arrived. During that time, a NASA satellite captured an unusual photograph of Earth that appeared to some observers to resemble the face of Satan in space. Although NASA explained that the image was simply a coincidence, the photograph shocked many people around the world. Some interpreted it as the possible face of the King of Terror. Reports even circulated that after seeing the image, former United States President Bill Clinton insisted on sharing it with the Pope and with religious leaders from various faiths. Time moved forward. More than 25 years have now passed. Humanity safely passed through the year 1999, and the world did not come to an end. So was Nostradamus' prophecy inaccurate? Or did the mysterious other object that he mentioned somehow appear and prevent the catastrophe? Perhaps as history continues to unfold, the answer will gradually reveal itself. Recently, another prophecy of Nostradamus has begun circulating widely on the internet. Some online commentators believe that this verse corresponds with the prophecy of the King of Terror and describes events unfolding after the year 1999. And according to these interpretations, the crucial year is 2026. This verse is often associated with Century 8 Quatrains 77, which reads, 3 antichrists will soon be destroyed. Their war will last for 27 years. The unbelievers will be killed, captured, or exiled. Blood, bodies, floods, and red hail will cover the earth. The figure of the Antichrist appears multiple times throughout the centuries. Many interpreters believe that Nostradamus described 3 antichrists throughout history, and that one of them would appear in our own era, the very figure sometimes associated with the King of Terror. According to this interpretation, although the world did not end in 1999, those who resisted the Antichrist would continue to suffer persecution for 27 years. If we calculate 27 years after 1999, which year do we reach? The answer is 2026. This number is not merely a point in time. For many historical observers, it appears almost like a powerful indictment directed toward ruling forces in the East that promote atheistic ideology. In their view, it reflects a process of large-scale ideological conditioning that attempts to reshape how people think about faith, morality, and authority. If we look back at the historical trajectory of the Chinese Communist Party, since the period after 1945, the story often described by historians involves more than the development of a political system. It also includes a long series of campaigns that sought to reshape social values and cultural beliefs within Chinese society. From the early years of communist rule, policies were introduced that restricted religious institutions and placed heavy pressure on communities practicing Christianity, Buddhism, and other faith traditions. These policies were rooted in a governing philosophy that emphasized state-centered ideology and discouraged religious belief. At the core of this approach was an effort to remove the influence of spiritual authority from public life. The reasoning behind this was straightforward. A person who holds deep religious beliefs may also hold moral values that exist independently of the state. When individuals believe that moral principles, such as justice, compassion, or personal conscience, serve as the ultimate measure of life, those beliefs can shape their choices in ways that remain outside direct political control. For that reason, ideological education campaigns promoted a strongly atheistic worldview and encouraged citizens to place their loyalty primarily in the political system rather than in religious faith. In such an environment, the traditional teachings of compassion, forgiveness, and spiritual discipline found in religions such as Christianity and Buddhism were often replaced in public life by narratives emphasizing political loyalty and collective ideology. When spiritual belief loses its place in a society, the moral framework that once guided everyday life can also begin to shift. Acts of kindness may be interpreted as weakness, while harshness or ideological rigidity may be portrayed as necessary for survival within a competitive political environment. As moral standards change, public discourse can also change. Some interpreters of Nostradamus believe he described an era in which truth becomes distorted and wrongdoing gains influence. Observers sometimes connect this idea to real-world events. One example frequently mentioned is the campaign launched in 1999 against practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual practice that combines meditation with moral teachings centered on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. In July of 1999, Chinese authorities officially banned the movement and began a wide-ranging crackdown. Reports from human rights organizations state that many practitioners were detained, sent to labor camps, or placed in detention facilities without formal trial. Former detainees have described various forms of mistreatment, including physical abuse and psychological pressure, intended to force them to renounce their beliefs. The stated goal of these measures was often to compel individuals to sign written declarations, abandoning their spiritual practice. One of the most serious allegations raised by international investigators concerns forced organ harvesting. Various independent research groups, including organizations such as the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China (ETAC), have conducted investigations into claims that some prisoners of conscience were subjected to medical examinations that created databases of organ compatibility. According to these investigations, some detainees were later used as involuntary organ donors when transplant patients required compatible organs. These allegations remain the subject of ongoing international scrutiny and have been described by some researchers as potential crimes against humanity. Falun Gong practitioners were not the only group affected by state policies. In later years, international attention also focused on conditions in Xinjiang, where large-scale detention facilities were established as part of security programs targeting members of the Uyghur ethnic minority. Governments and human rights organizations have debated the nature of these facilities, with critics describing them as internment camps, and Chinese authorities characterizing them as vocational or anti-extremism training centers. These developments have generated intense global discussion about religious freedom, human rights, and the balance between security policies and civil liberties. For many observers, the question is not only political, but moral. They ask how societies should protect human dignity and spiritual freedom in the modern world. In prophetic interpretations, inspired by Nostradamus, such systems of power are sometimes described as forces opposed to faith structures that elevate political authority above spiritual belief, an attempt to reshape human conscience through ideology. When a government places itself above all spiritual authority, treats citizens primarily as instruments of the state, and attempts to eliminate independent belief systems in order to strengthen its power, critics argue that it represents one of the most extreme forms of political control. And now, as the world stands in the year 2026, the point that some interpreters associate with the completion of the 27-year cycle mentioned in Nostradamus's verses, a difficult question emerges. Could the political upheavals unfolding in the world today represent the closing chapter of that period? As powerful leaders face pressure, instability, or sudden changes in fortune, some observers see more than ordinary political turbulence. They see the possibility that a long historical cycle is reaching its conclusion. In this interpretation, the fall or weakening of powerful rulers does not merely signal a shift on the geopolitical chessboard. It may symbolize the end of an era of ideological repression, and the moment when history begins to move again toward justice for those who suffered persecution over the past 3 decades. According to information leaked from internal whistleblowers, a violent armed clash reportedly took place at this very location. A group of compromised officers from the security guard unit, believed to be linked to factions that had previously been purged, allegedly attempted to carry out an assassination plot targeting the country's highest leader. Gunfire reportedly erupted within some of the most tightly secured floors of the complex. Xi Jinping was reportedly able to escape death by a narrow margin thanks to the swift response of his loyal bodyguards from the Central Guard Bureau. However, the incident is said to have left an unprecedented psychological and security shock within the leadership circle. Following the incident at the Jingxi Hotel, Xi's public appearances reportedly decreased significantly, giving rise to widespread speculation about his health. Several sources claim that he may have undergone an emergency medical intervention. The rare video footage that appeared afterward was closely analyzed by observers. Analysts examined details such as an unsteady walking posture, reduced flexibility in hand movements, facial expressions, and reaction speed, some suggesting possible signs of neurological weakness or the aftereffects of a stroke. At the same time, his absence from several major strategic forums, where he appeared only through written statements or pre-recorded video messages, further intensified speculation that a serious health condition might be being carefully concealed in order to prevent instability within the party. Within this context, some observers believe these developments may be part of the sequence of events that Nostradamus hinted at in his 27-year cycle. Especially when compared with the prophecy of 27 years described in Century 8 Quatrain 77, many people cannot help but question whether the line 3 antichrists will be quickly destroyed might refer to 3 figures in history. The first is often associated with Napoleon Bonaparte, the ruler who shook the foundations of Europe. The second is widely believed to be Adolf Hitler, the terrifying figure who defined the horrors of the 20th century. And the third, according to many interpretations, would appear in our own era. Some speculate that this could refer to the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, whom Nostradamus is believed by some interpreters to have described as a ruler responsible for 27 years of bloody persecution before being brought down. When the number 27 years is placed alongside the timeline from 1999 to 2026, many observers see what they believe to be a striking coincidence, pointing toward the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Why would it be him? In Nostradamus's writings, the third Antichrist is often described as an atheistic ruler. This description aligns, according to some interpretations, with an ideology that has attempted to eliminate religious belief, suppress Christianity and Buddhism, and carry out a prolonged campaign of persecution, most notably the persecution of practitioners of Falun Gong over the past 27 years. When a ruler places himself above the divine and uses power to trample the conscience and faith of peaceful people. Some believers argue that such a figure effectively brands himself with the mark of the Antichrist. Yet in traditional belief, justice eventually returns. In Eastern culture, the downfall of tyrants is rarely seen as random. It is often believed to coincide with harsh cycles of cosmic correction. And as the world enters the year 2026, humanity may not only be confronting the prophecies of Nostradamus, but also approaching a profound turning point that ancient Eastern sages warned about thousands of years ago. In traditional Chinese prophecy, this period is sometimes referred to as the years of the fire horse and fire goat. In the traditional heavenly stems and earthly branches calendar of the East, the phrase red horse and red goat refers to two specific years in the 60-year cycle, the year of the fire horse and the year of the fire goat. In classical Chinese terminology, these correspond to the years Bingwu and Dingwei. According to many historical records and long-standing oral traditions in Chinese culture, years belonging to this cycle are often associated with major turning points in history. Looking back at the past, some historians and folklore traditions suggest that a number of significant events occurred during what are called red horse, red goat years. Examples frequently mentioned include the decline of the Western Zhou dynasty, the fall of the Northern Song dynasty, the death of Liu Bang, the founding emperor of the Han dynasty, the period when Empress Liu held dominant power at court, and the moment when Wu Zetian first entered the imperial palace. Although historians may interpret these events differently in popular tradition, such years are often regarded as moments when major historical shifts began to unfold. In the 20th century, there were also years that some observers associated with the red horse, red goat cycle. One example often mentioned is 1907, when a number of revolutionary uprisings took place in China, movements that later contributed to the emergence of the Republic of China only a few years afterward. Later came the years 1966 and 1967, which marked the beginning of the Cultural Revolution, a turbulent political movement in China that lasted for roughly a decade and profoundly reshaped the country. According to the heavenly stems and earthly branches cycle, the next fire horse year will occur in 2026. For that reason, some people believe this year could once again coincide with a major turning point in history. Some researchers also connect this idea to ancient Chinese prophetic writings. In an inscription known as the Inscription to Save the World from Calamity, traditionally attributed to Liu Bowen, a strategist and scholar of the Ming Dynasty, there is a passage warning that humanity must be especially cautious when passing through the year of the dragon and the year of the snake, because these years would be particularly difficult. When translated into the modern calendar, these years are often interpreted as 2024 and 2025. According to this interpretation, after humanity passes through these difficult years, 2026 could mark the beginning of a new phase. Another well-known prophecy appears in the classical text, the Tui Bei Tu, often translated as the back-pushing diagram. A famous Chinese prophetic work traditionally attributed to Liu Bowen and Yuan Tiangang. One line from the text roughly states, "It will be difficult to pass through the years of the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, and the snake. If one can survive those years, it will be like living as an immortal." In terms of the traditional zodiac cycle, these correspond to the years 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. Because of this, some interpreters believe that once those years have passed, society may enter a more stable period. Another reference appears in a prophetic poem attributed to Chan Master Huangbo from the Tang dynasty, which states that the destiny of a ruling regime will end in the year of the golden snake. In the modern zodiac cycle, the most recent snake year falls in 2025, which leads some interpreters to speculate that 2026 could mark the beginning of a major transformation in the political order. These ideas do not appear only in ancient writings. Similar predictions have also surfaced in modern speculation. Some well-known online forecasters have suggested that after 2026, the world may begin to see certain positive developments emerge. However, they also warn that humanity may need to pass through a difficult period before reaching that point. An unusual story circulated online last autumn, when several internet users in the provinces of Liaoning and Hebei claimed they had encountered mysterious figures known as knife sellers of prophecy. In Chinese folk tradition, these individuals are said to sell knives in a very unusual way. They do not accept payment immediately. Instead, they claim they will collect the money several years later, only if their prediction comes true. Because of this, their true purpose is believed not to be selling knives, but rather drawing attention in order to pass on prophetic messages. According to photos shared online, one such knife seller appeared in Chengde, Hebei province. He was described as wearing simple clothing and maintaining a gentle smile. While offering kitchen knives to passers-by, he told people that he would return in 3 years to collect payment. If counted from that moment, 3 years later would be the year 2026. At one point, someone asked him, "Will you really come back to find us 3 years from now?" The knife seller simply smiled and gave no answer. The silence of that knife seller was not merely a riddle. It seemed more like a quiet reminder of the harsh filtering of destiny. Yet amid these warnings of calamity, amid the earth-shaking upheavals of dynasties and the rise and fall of rulers, the universe always appears to leave open a doorway for redemption. Prophecy of the Eastern Sage, the one who will bring salvation to humanity in the future. After the darkness of 27 years of persecution and the upheavals associated with the calamity known as the Years of the Red Horse and the Red Goat Pass, many ancient prophecies suggest that history will enter an entirely new chapter. It is said to be a period in which both Eastern and Western prophetic traditions point toward the same vision, an age of peace and a spiritual awakening for humanity. Among Western prophecies, the famous 16th century French seer Nostradamus repeatedly mentioned a mysterious figure whom later generations have often called the sage from the East. In his prophetic collection, Les Prophéties, the Prophecies, Nostradamus used several different expressions when referring to this figure. He described him as a new sage, and also used terms such as divine word, divine spirit, and divine ones to describe the teachings, ideas, and followers associated with this sage. After comparing multiple translations and interpretations, later researchers concluded that 3 important quatrains appear to outline the path of this Eastern sage's mission. The first quatrain: the path begins in persecution. Century 2, Quatrain 27. Holy speech will suffer oppression descending from above. He will find it difficult to advance. Secrets and truth will be sealed away. Yet they will continue forward. This passage is often interpreted to mean that when the sage first begins teaching in his own homeland, he will face intense persecution from the ruling authorities of the time. The repression arrives suddenly and forcefully, making it difficult for him to continue his work. In that situation, truth becomes concealed. Right and wrong are reversed, and the real meaning of his teachings is distorted. Yet the key message of the quatrain is that neither the sage nor his followers will give up. Even under persecution, they continue moving forward. The second quatrain: a journey from the east to the west. Century 2, Quatrain 29. A man from the east will leave his homeland. He will cross the Apennines and come to France. He will pass through sky, sea, and snow. With his sacred staff, he will awaken the world. According to common interpretations, this quatrain describes how the sage leaves his homeland in the east and travels across many regions of the world. Nostradamus mentions the Apennine Mountains, which run along Italy and also France, suggesting that the sage's influence will eventually reach Europe. The phrase passing through sky, sea, and snow is often understood symbolically, representing teachings that spread across borders and continents. The most striking image in the poem is the sacred staff that awakens the world. Scholars generally believe this does not refer to a literal object, but instead symbolizes a teaching or truth capable of awakening humanity. The third quatrain, a mission beyond the power of kings. Century 10, Quatrain 75. He will remain in Europe for a long time, unable to return. Yet, he will eventually return to Asia. Coming from the great Hermes, he will surpass all the kings of the East. In this passage, Nostradamus refers to Hermes, the divine messenger in Greek mythology. Hermes is often depicted carrying a staff capable of awakening those who are asleep. Because of this symbolism, many interpreters believe the staff represents the power to awaken human conscience and guide people toward truth. The quatrain also describes a unique journey. The sage leaves his homeland, spreads his teachings across the world, and eventually returns to Asia. By that time, the persecution has ended, and his influence surpasses all the kings of the East. This does not necessarily mean political authority. Rather, it may imply that his moral and spiritual influence rises above worldly power. What is the sacred staff? In the real world, of course, no person carries a magical staff. For that reason, many scholars believe this image is symbolic. Throughout history, figures such as Laozi Confucius, Jesus Christ, and Gautama Buddha have all been seen as teachers who awakened humanity through spiritual teachings. In that sense, the staff may represent the way, faith, or truth that the sage brings to awaken goodness and spiritual awareness within the human heart. Based on these interpretations, Nostradamus appears to describe a figure who begins teaching in the East, faces persecution from the authorities of his time, sees his teachings spread throughout the world, ultimately overcomes dark forces, and opens a brighter future for humanity. When will this sage appear? In most of Nostradamus's quatrains, the timeline is extremely vague. However, one quatrain is often considered unique because it seems to mention a specific time. This is the famous prophecy about the King of Terror. Century 10, Quatrain 73. In the month of July, in the year 1999, from the sky will come the great King of Terror to revive the great King of Angoumois. Before and after that, Mars will rule the world, saying it is to bring happiness to mankind. For many years, some people interpreted this poem as predicting the end of the world. However, according to certain records of Nostradamus's conversations, he once suggested that if another event were to occur, the world would not be destroyed. More than a quarter of a century has now passed since the year 1999, and the world still continues. This raises an intriguing question. Could the other event mentioned by Nostradamus refer to the appearance of the Eastern sage who brings a spiritual path, helping humanity pass through a time of chaos and step into a new era? Another intriguing coincidence, often mentioned in discussions of prophecy, is the case of Boriska Kiprianovich, the Russian boy who drew intense media attention around the year 2004. Boriska became famous almost overnight after claiming that he remembered memories from a civilization on Mars. In his accounts, Boriska also made a rather remarkable statement. He said that China is a nation chosen by God because in the future a divine guardian of the earth will be born there. Boriska said, "I cannot say who he is, but he is doing very important things. I have reincarnated together with him, and many gods have also reincarnated together with him." These words led many people to connect his statement with ancient prophecies about the sage from the East. So who exactly is this sage? The one described as the future guardian deity of the earth. After more than 20 years, many different interpretations have appeared on the internet. Among them, one especially interesting theory often mentioned is the image of the rabbit from the East, the mysterious pattern of the three hares sharing ears. In the history of religion and art, there exists a very strange motif whose origin remains unclear to this day. No one knows exactly who first created this image, and no one can say with certainty what it originally meant. What makes it extraordinary is that this motif appears across the entire Eurasian continent, crossing the boundaries of many different cultures and religions. This is the motif known as the three hares sharing ears. The image shows three hares running in a circle, chasing one another, forming a closed loop. The strange part is that the three hares share only 3 ears in total, yet each hare appears to have 2 ears. Those 3 ears together form an equilateral triangle at the exact center of the circle. This motif appears in many different cultures. In Germany, it is carved onto the doors of Christian churches. In England, it appears in stained glass church windows. In France, it is found in stone carvings at Notre Dame Cathedral, as well as on the heraldic emblems of noble families. In Judaism, the hare carries a relatively positive symbolic meaning. So the image of the 3 hares also appears on religious objects, such as the ark that holds the scriptures. Not only that, archaeologists have also discovered this motif on embossed pottery from 12th century Turkey-glazed ceramic fragments from 13th century Syria coins of the Mongol Empire minted in the year 1281, and terracotta reliefs from the ancient Sasanian Persian Empire. The true origin of the 3 hares. In the year 2006, 3 British researchers decided to trace the path of this mysterious motif. They began in Europe, then traveled through Central Asia, India, and Tibet. In the end, they discovered that the oldest known version of the 3 hares sharing ears motif was located in the Mogao Caves at Dunhuang, China. More specifically, it appears in cave number 407, which was built during the Sui dynasty around 1,500 years ago. The 3 hares are painted at the exact center of the ceiling caisson of the cave. Around them is a ring of lotus petals, and beyond that are 8 flying celestial beings, along with exquisitely detailed cloud and floral patterns. The entire composition creates a strong sense of continuous circular motion, producing a striking visual effect. So far, scholars have found the 3 hares motif in 16 different caves at Dunhuang, dating from the Sui dynasty to the end of the Tang dynasty. After completing their research, the 3 British scholars drew a distribution map of the motif. From that map, it becomes clear that the image of the 3 hares began in Dunhuang, then gradually spread westward, crossing deserts, mountains, and plains, and eventually became popular in medieval Europe. The meaning of the 3 hares. So why was the image of the 3 hares from the East embraced so widely? In Buddhism, the 3 hares running in a circle symbolize the ceaseless movement of life. For that reason, they represent the past, the present, and the future, and also symbolize the cycle of reincarnation. In Christianity, many people interpret the 3 hares as representing the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This also happens to echo a passage from the Book of Revelation. I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the rabbit and the symbol of Easter. Another interesting detail is that during the Middle Ages, the image of the rabbit began to become popular in the Western celebration of Easter. Easter is called Easter, a word some associate with the East. No one knows exactly what the rabbit originally symbolized, but the tradition of following the rabbit to find Easter eggs quickly became a favorite game among children. In that game, the Easter egg symbolizes the rebirth of life. The entire image seems to carry a symbolic message. Follow the rabbit toward the east, and life will be reborn. Later, in the famous novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the image of the white rabbit appears again. Alice follows the rabbit and enters a wondrous world. From that point on, the phrase "follow the rabbit" also became a familiar expression in Western culture. Prophecies about the rabbit from the East. So does this rabbit from the East truly carry some deeper meaning? Some people believe this coincides with the prophecies of Edgar Cayce, who once said that an important figure in the future of humanity would appear in China. What is especially striking is that in many ancient Chinese prophecies, the image of the rabbit also appears. In the Song of Heaven and Earth for 10,000 years, there is a line that says, "Beside wood, a rabbit walks into the future, becoming a ruler with ease, without lifting a hand." Its general meaning is, the rabbit beside the character for wood steps into the future becoming a leader naturally, without the need for force. In the Record of Geum, there is a line, "The wood rabbit is reborn to protect the wise." Its meaning is, the wood rabbit is reborn to protect those who possess wisdom. In the prophecy poem of Master Buksu, there is a line, The jade rabbit gradually rises in the east. Survival and downfall will be decided, merit and guilt will be clearly divided, and across the vast seas and heavens, peace will be seen. Its meaning is, the jade rabbit slowly rises in the east. Who remains and who falls will be determined. Merit and guilt will be separated clearly, and across heaven and earth, an age of peace will appear. In the inscription on the Jinling Tower by Liu Bowen, there is also a line, "Only by encountering the wood rabbit can one gain long life. Its blessing reaches all living beings, bringing joy and health." Its meaning is, only those who encounter the wood rabbit will gain longevity, and its grace will extend to all living beings, bringing happiness and well-being. The jade rabbit sage. Because of this, some internet users have proposed a rather interesting interpretation. They believe that the rabbit in these prophecies may symbolize a sage associated with the wood rabbit, someone who will bring a better future to China and perhaps even to the whole world. According to this line of thought, the sage from the east mentioned in Western prophecies may also be connected to the symbol of the rabbit, and perhaps that figure is precisely the jade rabbit sage. If that is true, then the game of following the rabbit to find Easter eggs may also carry a symbolic meaning. That when humanity follows the sage who comes from the east, it may step into a brighter future. Of course, before history fully unfolds, every prophecy can be interpreted in many different ways. So what about you? Do you have another interpretation of the sage from the east in these prophecies? Don't forget to leave a comment below the video. But remember, this history often passes through harsh turning points before it finds a place of peace. If the rise of the sage represents the final hope, then the collapse of oppressive empires may be the price that must be paid. Nostradamus painted a terrifying picture of an event that would reshape the entire geopolitical landscape in the year 2026. An event he described as the moment when the oceans begin to move and empires start to tremble. This is the prophecy often referred to as the ocean in flames, when the great ship sinks and the red enemy turns pale. Among the most debated quatrains of Nostradamus concerning war and global power, there is a striking image that has drawn the attention of many researchers, the image of a great ship sinking into the ocean and the red enemy turning pale. Scholars often associate this image with maritime events capable of reshaping the entire balance of power in the world. In the context of rising geopolitical tensions across the Indo-Pacific region, particularly in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, many analysts believe the image of an ocean in flames may symbolize a major turning point in modern military history. To better understand the meaning of this prophecy, it is important to examine the two key symbols Nostradamus referred to: the red adversary and the great ship. Let us begin with the symbol of the red adversary. In many interpretations of Nostradamus's quatrains, colors often carry symbolic meaning. The color red is frequently understood as representing a political ideology or a powerful political bloc. When placed within the context of the 21st century, many analysts connect the phrase, the red adversary, with nations that carry the symbol of the red flag or political systems rooted in revolutionary ideology. This interpretation becomes especially relevant in the Asia-Pacific region, where strategic maritime routes play a vital role in global trade. Power competition across these waters has become increasingly intense. Territorial disputes, large-scale military exercises, and the deployment of advanced naval fleets have turned the oceans into a tense strategic chessboard. Within this context, the image of the red adversary turning pale suggests a moment of strategic shock. It evokes an event that forces a powerful maritime nation to confront an unexpected defeat or a disruption so severe that its entire geopolitical strategy is suddenly thrown into disarray. The second mysterious symbol is the great ship. Nostradamus lived in the 16th century, a time when naval warfare revolved primarily around fleets of sailing ships. However, in his prophetic writings, researchers often interpret the great ship as a symbol of national power. In the modern era, this image easily evokes symbols of maritime dominance, such as aircraft carriers, heavy cruisers, or strategic naval fleets. Such vessels represent far more than military hardware. They also symbolize geopolitical status and national prestige. Therefore, when Nostradamus describes a great ship sinking into the ocean, many researchers believe he may be referring to an event far more consequential than an ordinary maritime accident. It could represent a military catastrophe, a strategic disaster, or a turning point that forces the entire world to reassess the balance of power at sea. 3 scenarios that could lead to the ocean in flames. Based on current military technology and geopolitical trends, analysts have proposed 3 possible scenarios that might explain the image described by Nostradamus. The first scenario involves a symbolic naval disaster. History shows that events which appear isolated at first can sometimes ignite massive conflicts. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 triggered the First World War, and a comparable event at sea could create a similar chain reaction in the modern era. If a warship that symbolizes the power of a major nation were sunk during a tense confrontation, the political and military consequences could quickly spread across the world. The second scenario involves the emergence of a revolutionary military technology. Over recent decades, global powers have invested heavily in advanced systems such as unmanned submarines, artificial intelligence combat systems, and directed energy weapons. A breakthrough technology introduced on the battlefield could transform the entire logic of naval warfare. When a powerful fleet suddenly loses its advantage to an unexpected technological leap, the psychological and strategic shock could push its adversary into a state of confusion and alarm, echoing Nostradamus's image of the red adversary turning pale. The third scenario involves a reckless military decision made under political pressure. Throughout history, many major conflicts have emerged when a nation facing serious internal challenges attempts to redirect attention outward. A military operation at sea designed to demonstrate strength could quickly evolve into a crisis if events spiral beyond the original intentions. In such a moment, the ship of destiny of an empire could become trapped within the very ambitions that drove its rise. What makes this prophecy particularly striking lies in the consequences Nostradamus appears to describe. He portrays an event on the ocean that has the power to shake the entire political structure on land. Throughout world history, control of the seas has always been closely tied to control of trade, energy flows, and global shipping routes. When maritime order changes, the structure of global power changes as well. For this reason, the image of the ocean beginning to move may symbolize a shift in the world order itself. As naval powers enter a period of intense competition, every major event at sea carries the potential to trigger political earthquakes on land. Nostradamus seems to be delivering a warning. The collapse of a symbol of maritime power could lead to the destabilization of an entire political system. And at this intersection between the sea and global power, one historical era may come to a close while a new chapter begins. If the upheavals in Jingxi or Tehran represent the first gunshots on land, then the disaster on the ocean may become the decisive turning point for the ambitions of global powers. Perhaps the year 2026 will not merely mark another shift in history, but the beginning of a great purification upon the oceans, an event powerful enough to reshape the world order for decades to come. However, destiny does not stop with the raging waves beneath the ocean's surface. While empires remain absorbed in their struggle for power across the seas, they remain unaware that another danger greater and far more mysterious is quietly forming above their heads. This time the battlefield is no longer fleets of steel warships, but the very atmosphere itself, tightening under the pressure of invisible forces. The prophecy of a colossal superstorm and the upheaval of the atmosphere in the year 2026. Within the labyrinth of prophecies found in Les Prophéties, Nostradamus spoke not only of swords wars or fallen kings. He also left behind a chilling vision of what could be described as an assault upon nature itself. That vision appears in Century 1, Quatrains 17, a verse that has captured the attention of climate researchers as well as those who study unexplained aerial phenomena. Original Old French text. Par 40 ans, l'iris n'apparaîtra. Par 40 ans, tous les jours sera vœu. La terre aride en sic, cité croîtra, et grand déluge quand sera aperçu. Interpretive translation. For 40 years the rainbow will not appear. For 40 years it will be seen every day. The dry earth will crack under terrible drought, and great floods will arrive the moment they are seen. This quatrain sends a shiver through many readers because it describes something far beyond an ordinary climate shift. Instead, it portrays an extreme and abnormal transformation of nature itself. Imagine a world where, for 4 decades, Iris the rainbow vanishes entirely. In scientific terms, a rainbow appears when sunlight refracts through moisture suspended in the atmosphere. Its disappearance would suggest a profound alteration in atmospheric conditions. The sky might be choked by volcanic dust, massive clouds of wildfire ash spreading across continents, or atmospheric pollution so dense that light can no longer refract in the way it once did. Yet the true horror begins only after this long cycle of dryness ends. Nostradamus describes a sudden and suffocating transition from lands cracked open by relentless heat. Humanity is thrust into an era in which rainbows appear every single day. At first glance, this may sound like a beautiful image. Yet within the language of prophecy, it suggests something far darker. If rainbows appear constantly, the air remains saturated with moisture and the sky never ceases to release storms. This becomes the picture of a modern great flood, a world in which soil hardened by years of drought loses the ability to absorb water. Each storm transforms into a blade of destructive flooding, swallowing cities almost as quickly as they form. The most controversial line appears in the final phrase, "Et grands déluges." Quand sera aperçu, great floods will arrive the moment they are seen. Why did Nostradamus use wording that suggests they, rather than simply referring to a storm? And why does he describe disaster as arriving instantly, rather than gradually forming through natural atmospheric cycles? This wording opens the door to deeper interpretations. Some researchers believe Nostradamus was describing storms that emerge with unprecedented speed events, driven by rising ocean temperatures and unstable atmospheric systems. Others suggest the prophecy hints at human attempts to manipulate the atmosphere itself. In the modern age, technologies such as geoengineering and large-scale atmospheric experimentation have entered public discussion. In this interpretation, the storms described by Nostradamus represent weather phenomena shaped or amplified by human intervention. Another interpretation emerges from those who study unidentified aerial phenomena. They speculate that the phrase, "when they are seen," could refer to unusual objects or structures appearing within storm clouds, massive shapes hidden inside towering supercell formations. In recent years, scattered witness reports and leaked military discussions have described unusual atmospheric phenomenon clouds that seem to move against prevailing winds, flashes of metallic light within storm systems, and powerful electromagnetic disturbances capable of disrupting radar. Within speculative circles, some believe such phenomena might involve advanced technologies capable of influencing atmospheric processes, condensing moisture, triggering storms, or altering weather patterns on a massive scale. In this interpretation, Nostradamus envisioned a moment when the veil of ordinary weather would be torn open, revealing forces capable of shaping the atmosphere itself. When they appear, the balance of Earth changes. The floods of the year 2026 may therefore symbolize something greater than a natural disaster. They represent a turning point that forces humanity to look upward and realize that control over the planet has never truly belonged to humankind alone. The sudden arrival of storms also emphasizes speed. Natural disasters unfold with an intensity that overwhelms even the most advanced warning systems. At a deeper level, the number 40 years appears again and again, like a coded mark of destiny embedded throughout human history. Within the traditions of ancient sacred law and the wisdom of Eastern philosophy, the number 40 has never been seen as a random figure. It represents a sacred cycle of purification, a threshold that all things must pass through in order to cleanse the past. Human memory still carries the powerful image of 40 days and 40 nights of relentless rain during the Great Flood in the time of Noah, when rising waters washed away a world that had fallen into corruption. It also recalls the 40-year journey of the Israelites wandering through the desert, a long and painful path meant to free their minds from the chains of slavery before entering the Promised Land. Even in many spiritual traditions of discipline and meditation, 40 days often marks the period of ultimate testing before a soul reaches awakening. By invoking this number, Nostradamus appears to send a warning that humanity in the year 2026 is not merely facing a temporary weather phenomenon. Instead, it stands at the closing point of a long and painful cycle of purification. It is a moment when the accumulated debt of the world, built from arrogance and disbelief, reaches its peak. At that point, nature itself begins to exercise its supreme power in order to restore balance and prepare the stage for a new chapter of history, where those who remain are the souls tempered and refined through storms. When we look at the global picture in the year 2026 as ocean temperatures reach record highs and generate superstorms, carrying the energy of hundreds of nuclear bombs, the warning from the 16th century suddenly appears more vivid than ever. This reveals something deeper. The story is not merely about climate. It is a message about absolute imbalance. When humanity pushes beyond the boundaries of nature, nature responds with the raw force of the most primordial elements. At that moment, the atmosphere and the oceans cease to be simple environments for life. They become the forces that shape the future of civilization itself. And when the rainbow finally appears amid the abnormal storms of the year 2026, it may signal that an old chapter of history has been washed away, making room for a new era, one in which humanity must learn humility before the greatness of the earth, or vanish within the relentless current of destiny. Yet this purification does not unfold only in the outer world. It reflects a profound upheaval within the human heart itself. Nostradamus and the sages of the East spoke of catastrophe not to spread fear, but to remind humanity of a deeper truth. Every empire, every advanced weapon, and every expression of human arrogance becomes small before the laws of heaven. If the attempted assassination in Jingxi represents the fracture of artificial power and the sinking ship upon the ocean represents the collapse of expansionist ambition, then the superstorm of the year 2026 becomes the roar of the universe, demanding justice for beliefs that have long been trampled. Across 27 years of darkness, as compassionate souls endured persecution and faith was cast aside, the world accumulated a tremendous moral debt. The year 2026 is not the end of the world. It is a day of reckoning. It is the moment when those who proclaim themselves atheist kings must confront a simple reality. They cannot even command the wind, let alone control the destiny of an entire nation. When the tides finally withdraw and the sky becomes clear again, what remains upon the earth will not be gold or status, but compassion and the sacred connection between humanity and the Creator. Humanity now stands at the threshold between two eras. On one side lies the abyss of stubborn pride. On the other stands the doorway of renewal. Whether humanity chooses to follow the sage from the East, returning to the fundamental moral values of civilization, or continues to drift within the raging currents of power and ambition, that decision becomes the question of survival. Each person must answer before the bell of the year 2026 finally begins to ring. A prophecy warning of a dark future for the younger generation after 2026. While the world often focuses on major events such as wars, political crises, or natural disasters, Nostradamus appears to have left behind a deeper warning. He did not speak only about the destruction of cities or the collapse of empires. He also hinted at a quiet and gradual decline of the human mind. It is the vision of a generation that loses its spiritual direction, where people continue to exist physically, yet slowly lose the awakening of the soul. Many modern researchers believe that several of Nostradamus's quatrains may point towards such a social condition, particularly those often associated with Century 1 Quatrain 48 and Century 2 Quatrain 28. These verses are considered among the most puzzling passages in Les Prophéties, because Nostradamus used unusual symbolic images such as a frenzied head smoke and rest beneath the moon to describe a transformation in collective psychology and awareness. The verse most frequently cited is Century 2 Quatrain 28, Original Old French text. Le pénultième du surnom du prophète prendra Diane pour son jour, et repos lowing vaguera par frénétique test, et délivrant un grand peuple de impôts. Interpretive translation. The bearer of the final name of the prophet will take the moon goddess as his day of rest. He will wander far with a frenzied mind and release a great people from their burdens. For a long time, this quatrain has sparked debate among scholars because it does not describe war or disaster. Instead, it seems to speak about the condition of the human mind. The detail that first attracts researchers' attention is the phrase frénétique test, usually translated as a frenzied head or a mind in extreme agitation. In Old French, frénétique does not simply mean madness. It also suggests a mind overwhelmed by intense stimulation, as if covered by a thick mental fog where emotion and impulse overpower clear reasoning. For this reason, some modern researchers refer to this image as smoke heads. In this interpretation, Nostradamus may be describing a generation whose thinking becomes clouded and directionless. They live within an enormous ocean of information, yet struggle to distinguish truth from illusion. In the 21st century, this phenomenon feels strikingly familiar. People live among social media algorithms, endless streams of news, and continuous forms of digital entertainment. Together, these forces create a fog of perception. A mental environment in which the mind remains constantly stimulated, but rarely finds the quiet necessary for deep reflection. Within this context, the image of the smoking head becomes a powerful metaphor for the overload of the modern mind. In reality, scenes in major cities such as Philadelphia or San Francisco already reveal a disturbing symbol of this sleep of consciousness. Thousands of young people stand motionless or move in slow, trembling gestures on sidewalks and street corners, victims of the fentanyl and synthetic drug epidemic. This phenomenon reaches far beyond a public health crisis. It reflects a profound surrender of identity. When everyday life feels overwhelming or spiritually empty, drugs can function like a powerful form of noise, cutting a person off from pain, responsibility, and even hope. Instead of striving or dreaming, individuals drift into a chemical haze, slowly dissolving within it. A generation that should stand as the pillar of the future now appears collapsed along city streets, revealing the deep failure of a system that values material success while neglecting the human soul. Alongside physical narcotics, another form of intoxication has emerged: digital addiction. Video games and immersive virtual worlds have created powerful alternate realities. In the United States alone, millions of young people spend more than 10 hours each day inside virtual environments. For many of them, reality feels broken or exhausting. While inside games, they become kings, heroes, or conquerors. This reflects what Nostradamus may have hinted at as a silent withdrawal from reality. Instead of confronting political upheaval or the moral decline of society, many choose to disconnect entirely. They construct imaginary empires on screens while their real surroundings fall into neglect. Technology persuades them that they are living extraordinary lives, while in truth they drift deeper into a labyrinth of addictive algorithms. The combination of chemical dependency and entertainment technology has produced what many observers describe as a lost generation. When collective awareness becomes lulled by both narcotic substances and the glitter of digital achievement, society gradually grows indifferent to the deeper events shaping the age. Questions about who holds power in distant capitals or which great ships sink upon the oceans lose their meaning. For someone immersed in the great noise of distraction, even the collapse of the world can feel like a distant film playing somewhere far away. This may represent the darkest scenario Nostradamus envisioned: an invasion that requires no armies and no weapons, where the enemy only needs to offer endless distraction in order to transform an entire generation into willing captives. Not stopping there, Nostradamus also mentioned the image of Diane, the moon goddess, in Roman mythology. In many ancient symbolic traditions, the moon often represents ambiguity, the realm of dreams or states that exist somewhere between wakefulness and illusion. For this reason, when Nostradamus wrote that the figure in the prophecy would take the moon as his day of rest, Many researchers believe he was pointing toward a tendency to seek escape from reality. In modern society, this tendency can appear in many forms. Immersion in digital worlds, virtual reality experiences, or entertainment environments that allow people to temporarily forget the pressures of real life. Even more disturbing in the pursuit of virtual recognition. Some young people willingly participate in bizarre social media challenges. From suffocation games to extreme risk-taking stunts, they place their real lives at stake for the sake of a lifeless like button. These painful and meaningless deaths reveal how deeply awareness can be lulled into a state of sleep where people lose the ability to distinguish between life and death, between the screen and reality. The peak of this confusion appears in the emergence of non-human relationships. In Japan and several other developed nations, society has watched with unease as young individuals publicly declare marriage to virtual dolls or form emotional attachments to artificial conversational systems such as ChatGPT. When people begin to avoid human connection because it feels complicated or emotionally demanding, they may turn toward loving lines of code or lifeless figures that never challenge them. This reflects a form of emotional self-destruction. When the heart stops beating for other human beings, when the instinct to build families and continue life becomes replaced by artificial satisfaction, humanity begins drifting toward one of the quietest forms of decline in its history. Against this backdrop, the final line of the quatrain becomes particularly thought-provoking, and he will release a great people from their burdens. At first glance, this may appear to describe a positive act. However, many analysts believe Nostradamus may have been referring to a kind of psychological liberation rather than political freedom. Throughout history, there have been periods when societies became exhausted by complex social problems. During such times, people often turn to forms of entertainment or systems of information that help them forget the pressures of reality. In this sense, being released from burdens may mean that people gradually stop caring about the deeper challenges facing society, because their minds become filled with other experiences. At this point, many researchers believe Nostradamus' prophecy begins to mirror a defining characteristic of the modern age human beings living within a continuous ocean of sound and images. Streaming music, social media operating day and night, short-form video platforms, video games, and countless entertainment systems generate an endless current of content. This constant flow creates what can be described as a vast cultural noise. Such noise keeps the mind continuously occupied while simultaneously reducing the ability to reflect deeply. Within this environment, some scholars believe Nostradamus may have envisioned an era in which human attention becomes the most valuable resource and powerful media systems compete relentlessly to capture it. Viewed through this lens, the prophecy seems to carry a deeper message. Nostradamus was not speaking only about war or disaster. He was warning about a gradual weakening of society's spiritual and moral strength. History has shown that civilizations often decline when their foundational values fade. When people lose the capacity for independent thought and compassion toward one another, the structure of society itself begins to tremble. For this reason, the prophecy of smoke-filled heads and the great noise that lulls the people to sleep can be understood as a reminder of the importance of awareness and inner clarity. No matter how advanced technology becomes, the future of humanity still depends on preserving certain essential values: truth, compassion, and responsibility toward the community. Perhaps Nostradamus saw an age filled with turbulence, a time when humanity would stand before many different paths. And within that landscape, the most important question remains: will the generations of the future sink deeper into the fog of distraction, or will they rediscover the awakening of the human soul? The prophecy of the soulless king, the rise of artificial intelligence in the West. For centuries, the quatrains of Nostradamus have often been interpreted through the lens of war, natural disasters, or the rise and fall of dynasties. However, when some of his verses are placed within the context of the 21st century, many researchers begin to notice a completely different layer of meaning: the emergence of a new form of power that is not human. This power carries no blood in its veins, possesses no heart, and contains no soul. Yet it holds the ability to calculate, analyze, and make decisions on a scale that humanity has never witnessed before in history. Some scholars believe that Nostradamus may have hinted at this possibility in Century 2 Quatrains 17, a rarely discussed verse that contains unusual imagery connected to what he called a body without a soul. Original Old French text. Le corps sans âme plus naître en sacrifice jour de la mort, mis en nativité. L'esprit divin fera l'âme essuie, voyant le verbe en sa dignité. The verse is often interpreted as follows. The body without a soul will no longer serve as a sacrifice. The day of death will become a day of rebirth. The divine spirit will no longer rejoice when it sees the word enthroned in supreme dignity. The element that has sparked the greatest debate is the phrase, le corps sans âme, the body without a soul. In the context of the 16th century, this image was usually interpreted as a dead body or a religious metaphor. But when placed within the technological world of the 21st century, many interpreters believe the phrase may point towards something entirely different. It resembles a striking description of artificial intelligence, a system capable of thinking, calculating, and even communicating like a human being, yet containing no emotion, no soul, and no moral consciousness within. Over the past decade, the rapid development of AI has led scientists, philosophers, and political thinkers to ask an important question. What might happen if artificial intelligence systems begin making decisions at the level of governments or entire nations? In many ways, this process has already begun. Today, numerous governments and corporations in the Western world rely on AI systems to assist in major decision-making across many sectors. Within the financial system, algorithmic trading programs process trillions of dollars every single day on global stock markets. Within the legal system, tools are already used in several countries to analyze criminal records and estimate the likelihood that a defendant might re-offend, helping judges evaluate sentencing decisions. Within the military sphere, autonomous weapon systems and tactical artificial intelligence platforms are being developed to analyze battlefield conditions and recommend strategic responses in real time. A particularly notable example appears in military research programs across the United States and Europe, where AI is increasingly integrated into drone operations, missile defense systems, and strategic command centers. Even more disturbing are systems such as Gospel Habash, an artificial intelligence, reportedly used to generate target lists for military strikes at a rate of thousands of targets per day. When an algorithm decides to authorize a missile launch based on a 90% probability, it does not hesitate for a moment over the remaining 10% margin of error, which could represent the lives of innocent civilians. What emerges is a new form of warfare, where traditional judgment is replaced by cold calculation. The efficiency of elimination becomes more important than human compassion. For this reason, some researchers have begun describing artificial intelligence as the soulless power of the new era. It operates through logic, probability, and statistical modeling. It can optimize economic systems, predict social trends, and even assist in managing complex national infrastructures. At the same time, however, it raises a profound question. What happens when decisions affecting millions of human lives are made by a system that cannot feel suffering, compassion, or mercy? In the smart cities of the Western world, artificial intelligence is also beginning to play a role in the classification of citizens. Algorithms that evaluate credit scores or predict criminal behavior, often referred to as predictive policing, quietly influence who receives financial loans, who faces increased surveillance, or who may be denied access to certain services such as health insurance. An AI system can cut off a family's financial lifeline simply because their profile falls into a high-risk statistical category, without any awareness of the struggles that family may be enduring while trying to overcome hardship. To a soulless king, human beings appear merely as data points. Such a system possesses no understanding of mercy, no concept of second chances, and no capacity to grasp the deeply emotional stories hidden behind each number in a dataset. Even in everyday life, millions of workers in Amazon warehouses or drivers in the gig economy operate under the direction of what many analysts call algorithmic managers. Artificial intelligence monitors every movement, every pause, and every moment of productivity in order to optimize efficiency to an extreme degree. If a worker slows down because of exhaustion or illness, the system can automatically deduct performance points or terminate employment through a cold line of code. In these environments, human beings are often treated as replaceable mechanical components. The algorithm does not know whether someone has a small child waiting at home or an elderly parent who depends on their income. It only recognizes that the productivity chart must continue rising. This represents one of the deepest fractures of identity in the modern age, human beings gradually losing their humanity while striving to perform with the perfection of machines. Within Nostradamus's verse, another phrase attracts the attention of modern interpreters. Voyons le verbe en sa dignité, when the word is seen in its highest dignity. In the religious traditions of Europe, the word often expressed in Latin as verbum carries sacred meaning referring to divine truth or the word of God. But in the 21st century, some scholars believe this phrase may hold another interpretation, the language of machines. Large language models, such as ChatGPT and other advanced AI systems, have demonstrated that machines can generate written language, carry on conversations, and even participate in philosophical or political discussions. These systems are now widely used in education journalism, business, and scientific research. As a result, a new social phenomenon is emerging. People increasingly seek answers from algorithms. In many cases, the explanations generated by machines are treated as reliable sources of information, sometimes even replacing the guidance of experts, teachers, or political leaders. This transformation has led philosophers to raise a critical question. If humanity increasingly relies on artificial intelligence to interpret reality, could algorithms one day become the primary guides of knowledge within society? Viewed from this perspective, Nostradamus's prophecy may be interpreted as a warning about a profound shift in the structure of power within civilization. Throughout history, power was typically held by kings, empires, or political institutions. Yet in the technological age, power may gradually shift toward invisible systems operated through data computation and algorithms. This transformation is not necessarily negative. Artificial intelligence holds enormous potential to help humanity solve many of the complex challenges of the modern world, from medical research and disaster prediction to energy management and transportation systems. Nevertheless, Nostradamus appears to suggest that every form of power requires balance through ethics and responsibility. When systems without emotions begin influencing the direction of society, humanity must confront a crucial question: who truly holds control? At this point, Nostradamus's warning becomes especially thought-provoking. He wrote that when the body without a soul rises again, the divine spirit will no longer rejoice. This statement can be interpreted as a symbolic expression of concern that excessive dependence on technology might gradually distance humanity from spiritual values. If society becomes guided only by efficiency data and material advantage, then qualities such as compassion, morality, and faith may slowly fade from public life. In this sense, artificial intelligence can resemble a Trojan horse of the modern age. At first, technology is welcomed because it allows people to work faster, more accurately, and more efficiently. Yet some thinkers warn that if humanity grants too much authority to systems without consciousness, people may slowly surrender their own autonomy. For this reason, many researchers argue that instead of allowing AI to become a new king of the world, humanity must learn to keep technology in its proper place, a powerful tool guided and governed by human wisdom and moral responsibility. Nostradamus's prophecy of the fall of the false sacred house. Among the many mysterious quatrains left by Nostradamus, one particular verse often causes researchers to pause and reflect for a long time. Its language is deeply religious in tone, yet it appears to hint at an event that is profoundly secular and strikingly modern, rather than speaking directly about war or natural disaster. Nostradamus describes the collapse of a false sacred house, a structure that humanity reveres like a holy sanctuary, yet which in reality may be nothing more than a fragile system sustained by belief. Many modern scholars believe that when this prophecy is placed within the context of the 21st century, the image may correspond to a new global belief system, the modern financial order. Original Old French text. Lorsqu'on verra la sainte maison feinte du grand prophète en fuite estre déchassée par les païens, ces fuites seront peintes par le grand feu en mer les dustes chassés. An interpretive translation is often understood as follows. When the false sacred house is seen, driven into flight and chased away from the great prophet, the pagans will be revealed in their desperate escape, for a great fire upon the sea has driven them away. For centuries, interpreters believed Nostradamus was referring to temples or religious institutions in a literal sense. Yet when we observe the way the modern world functions, another interpretation gradually begins to appear more convincing. The false sacred house may serve as a metaphor for something that modern society trusts almost absolutely: the global financial system. In ancient times, people sought security within temples and divine powers. In the modern world, however, millions place their deepest trust in economic institutions such as central banks, stock markets, and digital currencies. Price charts, flashing trading screens, and high-speed financial algorithms have become the new altars of material civilization. We call this system a sacred house because billions of people entrust their entire future to it, their savings, retirement funds, investment portfolios, and digital assets. Yet Nostradamus deliberately used the word feinte, meaning false or artificial. This suggests that the structure may rest more on collective belief and expectation than on solid, enduring value. History has already shown several moments when the global financial system revealed its fragility. In 1929, the United States stock market collapsed within days, triggering the Great Depression and sending shockwaves across the global economy. In 2008, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers unleashed a chain reaction that shook the international banking system. These events revealed a fundamental truth about modern finance. When trust collapses, the entire structure can begin to crumble with astonishing speed. In Nostradamus's prophecy, the trigger for this collapse appears in a dramatic symbol, a great fire upon the sea. In many ancient traditions, the sea represents connection between lands and civilizations. In the modern world, this image can easily symbolize global trade networks and international financial flows. Capital moves across borders like powerful ocean currents. Electronic transactions, investment networks, and interlinked banking systems form a vast economic ocean connecting every major economy. When Nostradamus speaks of fire upon the sea, many analysts interpret it as a metaphor for a crisis spreading across the entire global financial system. Within today's interconnected financial world, built upon complex algorithms and intricate digital infrastructure, the warning about the collapse of the false sacred house begins to sound disturbingly realistic. An economic earthquake in the year 2026 may not begin with physical ruins. Instead, it could emerge from the collapse of digital confidence, where trillions of dollars in value vanish within moments through the rapid reactions of automated trading systems. History has already demonstrated the destructive power of such contagion. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008 triggered a chain reaction that drained liquidity across the global banking network, wiping out the savings of millions and shaking the world's largest economies. More recently, the sudden collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX and the failure of Silicon Valley Bank within 48 hours illustrated how rapidly panic can spread in the digital era. If in 2026, a system-level digital currency or a major national economy encounters a severe debt crisis, the resulting fire will not remain contained within national borders. With the speed of AI-driven trading and the amplification of fear through social media, panic could spread across global markets like a storm of flames racing across the financial ocean. Account balances displayed on screens could dissolve into nothing before governments have time to implement rescue measures. At that moment, the pagans mentioned in Nostradamus's prophecy, those who place their ultimate faith in the illusion of endless wealth, may confront a harsh reality. A tower built upon the sand of debt and speculation inevitably collapses at the moment when people least expect it. Within the Quatrains, the aftermath of this event is portrayed through the image of people fleeing in desperation. In many of his writings, Nostradamus used the word païens to refer to individuals lacking spiritual grounding. In the modern context, some researchers interpret this as describing those who have placed absolute faith in material wealth. When the system they worship collapses, they lose not only their money, but also their worldview. Scenes like this have appeared before during financial crises. Investors panic selling their assets, banks facing waves of withdrawals, and markets spiraling into fear. Sometimes these panicked withdrawals spread so widely that no safe refuge remains. For this reason, many interpreters believe the deeper message of Nostradamus' prophecy extends far beyond predicting a specific economic event. Instead, it reflects a pattern that has repeated throughout history. Any system built upon greed and blind faith eventually collapses when reality exposes its weaknesses. Extraordinary profits can appear for a time, but they rarely endure forever. In many economic cycles, those who rise fastest during the boom are often the ones who fall most painfully when the bubble bursts. From this perspective, Nostradamus' prophecy can be seen as a warning to the modern age. Money and financial markets can generate enormous power, yet they cannot serve as the eternal foundation of civilization. When humanity places all its faith in the temple of wealth, it risks forgetting that every economic system ultimately depends on deeper forces: social trust, ethical responsibility, and the balance of the real world. At this point, Nostradamus appears to leave humanity with a profound question. When the false sacred house begins to tremble, will civilization rediscover more enduring values? Or will it simply construct new temples upon the same fragile foundation? When gold and silver are buried. The lesson from the fall of the rich man. The shaking of these false sacred houses is not merely an economic crisis. It represents the collapse of a value system that has been placed in the wrong position. History has repeatedly demonstrated an unchanging law. Money can build magnificent empires, but only moral virtue can preserve that wealth from destruction. When morality decays, when people worship material possessions and trample upon human values, then all splendor becomes nothing more than a castle of sand before the powerful waves of destiny. Consider the tragedy of Pompeii, a city once known as one of the greatest centers of wealth and luxury in the ancient Roman world. Its people lived in grand villas surrounded by gold silk and endless celebrations. Yet beneath that glittering surface, social morality had begun to deteriorate. Then, in a single fateful night, Mount Vesuvius awakened and unleashed its fury upon the city. All the wealth, power, and treasures that once filled Pompeii were buried forever beneath layers of burning ash. Archaeologists who excavated the ruins centuries later discovered haunting scenes, skeletal remains clutching money pouches, and expensive jewelry frozen in their final moments. Yet at that moment, gold could not buy even one more breath. The city vanished from the world, leaving behind a powerful lesson for future generations. No matter how brilliant a civilization may appear, if it lacks a moral foundation to sustain it, sooner or later it can be consumed by the very arrogance that once fueled its rise. In the year 2026, when Nostradamus speaks of the collapse of the false sacred house, he is not merely referring to the disappearance of numbers on computer screens. His warning reaches deeper. It reminds humanity of the ancient principle that good and evil ultimately receive their due consequences. If prosperity continues to be built upon deception, upon the persecution of faith, and upon the cold logic of machines, then humanity may be constructing its own modern Pompeii. True wealth does not lie in the amount of gold or money that one accumulates. It resides in the peace of the human spirit and in the protection granted from above to those who preserve kindness and righteousness. When the temples of money collapse, that moment may also become an opportunity for awakening. It may remind humanity that only by returning to the path of moral integrity can people find genuine salvation amid the storms of a turbulent age. However, before spiritual values have a chance to awaken, another shadow begins to grow in a darker corner of civilization. Once again, human arrogance rises to challenge the laws of heaven. No longer satisfied with manipulating money or machines, humanity now reaches toward the final forbidden realm of creation, life, and death itself. A chilling prophecy of Nostradamus for the year 2026 hints at the arrival of an era in which science attempts to crown itself as master awakening forces that were meant to remain buried forever beneath the earth. Prophecy of the resurrection of ancient creatures. For many centuries, the Quatrains of Nostradamus have often been interpreted as predictions about wars, shifts of power, or upheavals in nature. Yet when some of his symbolic images are placed within the context of modern science, many researchers begin to notice another thought-provoking possibility. Nostradamus may have envisioned an era when humanity would begin to intervene directly in the very structure of life itself. Within his layered and symbolic verses, he describes a future in which human beings attempt to grasp powers that were once believed to belong only to the Creator. What once sounded like distant science fiction now appears increasingly close to the reality of the 21st century. One of the quatrains often discussed in relation to this theme is Century 3 Quatrain 92, original Old French.
Le monde proche du dernier période Saturne, encore tard sera de retour, translat empire de vers nation broder l'œil, arraché à Narbon par autour.
This quatrain has received many different interpretations throughout history. However, when modern scholars attempt to connect it with symbolic images such as a garden of rebirth or figures described as men in white garments, they often consider it within the context of the rapidly advancing field of biological science today. In a symbolic interpretation, the passage may be understood in the following way. A memory spreads across the gardens, a radiant light shines upon those in white robes, when that which has long been dead walks again among the living. Ancient forces awaken once more. Under this interpretation, the image of those wearing white is often associated with scientists, particularly researchers working in biology and genetics. In the 21st century, biological science has entered a period of unprecedented advancement. Gene editing technologies such as CRISPR now allow scientists to modify DNA with remarkable precision. Laboratories around the world are conducting research aimed at restoring or recreating species that disappeared from the Earth long ago. One of the most well-known examples is the effort to revive the woolly mammoth. Scientists from several research institutions and biotechnology companies in the United States are working with genetic material preserved in Arctic permafrost. By reconstructing fragments of mammoth DNA and combining them with the genome of the Asian elephant, researchers hope to produce a hybrid creature capable of surviving in the cold environments of the far north. At the same time, other projects seek to restore extinct birds or animals that vanished from ecosystems centuries ago. This emerging scientific field is commonly known as de-extinction. For many observers, these developments represent an astonishing scientific achievement. If successful, such efforts could help restore damaged ecosystems and even repair some of the environmental losses caused by human activity in the past. Yet alongside this sense of possibility, profound questions also emerge. When Nostradamus writes of that which has long been dead walking again among the living, some analysts believe he may be describing precisely such a moment when science succeeds in bringing a creature from the distant past back into the present world. However, the concern raised by many scientists does not lie solely with the resurrected creature itself, but also with what might accompany it. Ancient DNA samples are often discovered in permafrost layers of the Arctic or in extremely old sediments. Within these environments, not only animal DNA can be preserved, but sometimes ancient viruses and microorganisms as well. In recent years, researchers have identified viruses that remained frozen in ice for tens of thousands of years. When carefully revived in laboratory conditions, some of these ancient viruses have still demonstrated biological activity. This discovery has led scientists to ask an unsettling question. If ancient pathogens were released into the modern environment, what consequences might follow? In this context, the symbolic image of a garden of rebirth has sometimes been interpreted as a metaphor for modern biological laboratories, controlled environments where organisms are cultivated, studied, and revived under highly regulated conditions. Such research facilities are typically built with extremely strict biosafety systems. Yet the study of powerful viruses and unknown biological agents continues to provoke intense debate within the scientific community. Some experts believe that studying ancient pathogens could help humanity prepare for future pandemics. Others worry that manipulating biological agents whose properties remain poorly understood could introduce significant risks. From a symbolic perspective, Nostradamus may also have been highlighting another theme, human pride in the face of scientific power. He describes a light shining upon those in white robes, a possible symbol of the admiration and honor that society often grants to scientists when they achieve groundbreaking discoveries. Yet that light may also represent something else, the light of ambition. Throughout history, many scientific breakthroughs have brought tremendous benefits to humanity. At the same time, each new discovery has also introduced complex ethical questions. As humans gain the ability to alter genes, revive extinct species, and reshape living systems, the boundary between scientific exploration and excessive intervention in nature becomes increasingly fragile. For this reason, many researchers believe the deeper message behind Nostradamus's imagery is not a rejection of science, but rather a caution. Science provides immense power, yet that power must always be balanced with responsibility and humility. If humanity pursues scientific glory while forgetting the limits of nature, then the greatest achievements of human intellect could also carry unforeseen risks. Perhaps the most profound question Nostradamus leaves for the modern age is this: at what point does scientific progress transform into human arrogance? And when that fragile boundary disappears, will humanity possess the wisdom required to control the power it has created? Looking back across humanity's journey through the centuries, from the Great Fire of London, the rise of Napoleon, to the haunting shadows of the two world wars, we begin to see that the 15 most significant prophecies of Nostradamus are not isolated events. They form a chain of destiny that seems to tighten around the year 2026, a year portrayed as a moment of purification for all of humanity. We have already witnessed the collapse of empires that once appeared invincible, from fractures of power in the East to the shocking assassination in Tehran, and even the downfall of the modern temples of money built upon fragile foundations. These prophetic visions sketch a sweeping portrait of the downfall of greed and godless arrogance, a world where restless oceans swallow the expanding great ships of power, and where the skies erupt with extraordinary superstorms that sweep away the pride of scientific ambition. From the smoke-filled minds of a generation lost in drugs and virtual worlds, to the cold rule of the soulless king of artificial intelligence, and even the dangerous awakening of ancient pathogens once buried in the depths of time. Each thread leads humanity toward a decisive crossroads between survival and ruin. Nostradamus, together with sages from the East, did not merely speak of catastrophe. Their words suggest that when old artificial systems collapse, the true character of humanity is revealed and tested. The year 2026 does not necessarily represent an ending. Instead, it resembles a vast resurrection. When the false glories of wealth, power, and machines fade away, humanity may find itself standing in darkness, forced to search for light within. It is at that moment, according to many interpretations, that the call of a sage from the East begins to resonate. This call does not promise salvation through physical power, but through the awakening of morality and the healing of fractured souls. 15 prophecies from distant history to the turbulence of the present seem to converge upon a single message: destiny does not lie in the stars, but in the choices we make. Will humanity cling to the bags of gold of a burning Pompeii, or release its arrogance and walk the path of virtue and compassion? The door to a new era is opening, and only those who carry a pure heart may pass through the storm to greet the dawn of a truly humane civilization. Thank you for joining us on this journey to explore these 15 fateful prophecies. The year 2026 approaches, bringing both severe trials and priceless opportunities for renewal. Do not allow yourself to drift into the noise that lulls the mind to sleep. Keep your mind clear and your heart warm. Do you believe you are ready for the changes ahead? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe so that we can continue exploring the mysteries of our age together. We will see you again in the next chapter, where more truths are waiting to be revealed.